Did you get what you were trying to tell us something?
No, I just read this.
The spider.
Yeah, that's it. Just like closer.
I'll tell you the halftime score.
Good.
Sorry for that, I felt
Expect to be
bad.
home by halftime.
It's the halftime score just.
Good evening. I'd like to call to order the Committee of the Whole meeting for Monday, November 22nd, 2021. First up, we have the Girl Scouts of Rocky Fork Service Unit 897 to make a presentation to the Police Department. You guys want to come forward? Thank you for being here.
Council, first of all, I just want to explain what happened or how this transpired.
So probably approximately 3 to 4 months ago, I received a phone call from Lois Beckman requesting ways that her service unit could assist the City of Gahanna Division of Police, and if we would be interested in partnering with them in a teddy bear collection to place the bears in the cruisers. The focus was to take these bears and pass them back to the community based on crisis events that the officers they go to, any traumatic event. And then any overage that we would have, we would share along with other city agencies as well as the fire department to put on the fire truck. So,
So I'm the Girl Scout troop leader. My name's Lois Beckman. I'm the third grade Brownie troop leader for the troop at St. Matthew School. And we are part of the Rocky Fork Service Unit. So we volunteered to lead the project this month. And we solicited donations from multiple troops in the Rocky Fork service area, which includes the Gahanna Elementary Schools as well as St. Matthew and a few other schools. And we collected a lot of bears. And I'm going to put my daughter on the spot. Come on up and tell them how many bears we collected.
We got 114 bears.
Wow. So we are really excited to get to present the bears.
Well, we have a certificate, oh, sorry, Kevin.
That's all right.
We have just a certificate of thanks to share to the Girl Scout troop, but I'll read it. The City of Gahanna extends its sincere thanks to the Girl Scouts of Ohio's Heartland Council Rocky Fork Service Unit number 897 for their service in donating teddy bears to the Gahanna Division of Police for distribution to those who are most vulnerable in our community. Thank you very much, ladies. This is excellent work, and you're going to help a lot of kids in your community. So thank you very much.
Yeah, whatever. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Okay, next item we have, item from the Department of Planning.
Good evening, Council. Michael Blackford. One item for your consideration tonight, that is amendments to the building and zoning fee schedule for 2022. There's two changes associated with the request. One is for the adoption of fees for the rental registration program. You may recall that that's been on pause now for a little while. Two changes associated with that. There was the rewrite of the code, and there's also the restructuring of fees. When we were looking at fees, there were two things that we needed to accomplish. One was to simplify the fees. Previously, under the old calculation, you needed a worksheet, and fees depended on the number of buildings and units within the buildings, and then there were different values associated with those units depending on how many units were in the building. So it required upwards of 20 sheets of paper to calculate fees. We have a flat fee now based on the number of units and registration. The other component to the fee change was to align the fees more closely with the amount of work that staff was involved in. So again, we have a flat fee proposed. And to give you a couple of examples of what changes would look like, I think we're all familiar with the park project on Hamilton Road, about a mile north of City Hall. Under the 2019 fee schedule, that project would have been required to pay approximately $9,500 in fees. And in the proposed fee schedule, it would be about $900. And Creekside would have been about $4,300, and now it's $700. And this new fee aligns a little more closely with the amount of work that staff will be involved for each of those requests. There are some paperwork, there are some site visits, and inspections required. The second change is for the Property Appeals Board. They'll be hearing appeals of the nuisance code. I think it was about a couple months ago. City Council appointed members to the Property Appeals Board. That fee is $50. That aligns with fees for the appeals that the Board of Zoning and Buildings hears for single-family properties as well. So that constitutes our changes. I'm available for any questions, and I appreciate your time this evening. Thank you.
Any questions? No. Okay. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. So anyone have a problem with this being on consent agenda? Okay, so we'll have a first reading next meeting. No need to come back to committee, and then consent agenda. Thank you. Next, items from Director of Parks and Recreation. Item 0075-2021 has been pulled by the administration, and after several questions were raised, so they're going to bring that back to us later. So that will not be on the agenda tonight.
Thank you. I have a few items, so I hope you don't mind
Right.
the seated position here. So the first item that we have is Resolution 0037-2021, and this is a resolution of authorization. This is to apply for the Land and Water Conservation Grant. The resolution is a requirement for the application. Ultimately, it is to agree for the filing of that application, as well as the agree to obligate the necessary funds. It is a 50% match. The appropriation from 2021 does cover that match requirement. So ultimately, this is a formality for us to move forward with the Land and Water Conservation Grant for the Price Road House.
Does anybody have any questions? Nope. Okay, y'all all okay with consent agenda? Okay, so we will have ordinance, or is this a resolution? So the resolution can be on the consent agenda on the next meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. I have another item. This is for Ordinance 0076. This is a request to amend Chapter 153. Chapter 153 is reviewed annually by the Parks and Recreation Board. The requested changes are to better define the responsibilities of the Parks and Recreation Board.
Any questions on the changes? Nope. Okay. You okay with consent agenda? Okay, so we will have 0076-2021 will be introduced at the next meeting, and then no need to come back to committee, and then it will be on the consent agenda to next meeting. Okay?
Thank you.
Thank you.
The last item I have is actually it's an update for the department, and there's a PowerPoint that will be available to you momentarily. So ultimately, this is for the year of 2021. This will cover the Parks and Recreation divisions separately. Thank you. So first slide, moving into the staffing, we were able to fill the vacant Parks and Facilities Superintendent role. That was a promotion of the former Recreation Supervisor, Zach Guthrie. Instead of backfilling that position, we took a look at the need of the division and decided to promote 2 part-time coordinators to full-time instead of backfilling that supervisor position. So Matt Moser was a part-time coordinator, as well as Josh Latsko, so they were promoted to full-time. Also, the appropriations for the horticulturist as well as the facility maintenance coordinator was approved by council, so those were filled. And those individuals, Brian Kennedy as well as Tim Fletcher, have been doing an incredible job and have been a great addition to the team. Also for 2021, made the transition from part-time, a majority of part-time team members in the Parks Division, into full-time general maintenance workers. We had a lot of challenges with finding individuals for those part-time roles. And then when we were able to fill those positions, the turnover was very high. So we would train the staff, and then 6 months later, we would unfortunately lose them to a full-time position elsewhere. So with that transition, we were able to promote 4 part-time team members to full-time in order to get those full 6 team members. We had the opportunity with a third party to undergo an employee assessment. As I am sure you noticed, we have a lot of new staff members in their positions, including myself, as well as, of course, a lot of change throughout the last couple years. So the assessment was able to put some time and investment into how they work, how they communicate as a team, how they communicate as individuals, just to help set the tone as we move forward and to align some goals and strategies of how we fit together as a unit. Moving on. I will reference the pricing policy quite a bit in the next few slides. If you remember, the pricing policy is something that council reviews annually. The Parks and Recreation Board also reviews it annually for any type of changes. The policy ultimately determines how we set fees and what recovery strategy we have for each of those fees. So summer camp is up for this next slide here. That is a level 3 recovery based off of our pricing policy. That's the 50 to 85% recovery is the goal there. For this summer, we did have a 55% reduction in available spaces, and that was due to we had to make some decisions on how we were to move forward with summer camp prior to the state relieving some of the COVID restrictions. So due to the unknown, we did make the decision to reduce those capacities, and then ultimately we were unable to hire additional camp counselors once those restrictions were lifted in order to expand those. We're accredited by the American Camping Association, also ACA, and the accreditation requires us to meet certain ratios. So staffing does determine how we're able to fulfill that as a responsibility. With those reductions, we did have to make some adjustments to how we staff those in order to comply to our recovery strategy. So we were still able to recover 60% from this season. Moving on to aquatics. Same thing as aquatics, we weren't really sure what to expect as far as even having a season to be open and running. Thankfully, by March, we were able to switch gears and start some recruitment. In the Excel document, the table, those are visits. So membership visits are, of course, people who purchase those memberships, and then the daily guests are just that day passes. The one thing that I'll notate here, you'll notice that Hunter's Ridge is actually, for the 2021 season, actually saw more of the membership visits than GSP did. That's something that we've commonly known. The members who are purchasing those memberships are visiting Hunter's Ridge more frequently. But then you'll also see that we did see an increase of those day passes. That has a lot to do with our memberships were down, as you'll see below, but those day passes went up, which makes sense. For the season, we did have an 82% recovery, which is, we typically average 75%. So this summer was a successful summer. Moving on to active seniors. So the seniors at level 2, so 20 to 50% recovery is our goal there. The membership visits is based off of participation. So we don't necessarily have a drop-in center. Our center is based around programming, so they're coming to participate in something that we're offering. So we did see 1,500 visits. We didn't open until July of 2020. July 15th of 2021. So we, of course, had a reduced season. You'll see that there's an 8% recovery, which is something that we expected. We rely heavily on memberships, and the 2020 memberships were extended through the end of this year. So we did not have a membership drive because we weren't open in 2020, but we had individuals that had purchased the pass. We still had opportunities for remote activities, but we didn't feel like it was the right thing to do to hold their membership. So we did make that decision to extend it through the 2021 season. Moving into 2022 with those membership drives, we do anticipate to see that recovery back to where it needs to be between that 20 and 50. We typically average about 35% for senior center. Moving on to golf. The golf has had a pretty incredible last couple of years. You'll see here the rounds and then the rounds that were used with carts. We continue to see a lot of visits, a lot of new participants at the golf course. Again, something that you're able to do. The grounds are kept very well. We hear often that the fact that it's a municipal golf course is impressive by the care that's taken into the course. So we're very proud of that. The numbers that you see for 2021 are through October. That is not November numbers. So that is going to continue to improve. We're still seeing some golfers out there. So excited to see what that end of year looks like. But we are at a 147% recovery. So people are golfing this year. The next is for our special events and recreation programming. I won't go through each of these specifically, but the numbers to the right are the participants that were included here. We do seek a lot of alternative funding for the programs, special events that we have. So we did have $27,250 of sponsorships to date. And then most notably, and actually, Zach Guthrie is the brainchild of this, so I'm glad he's in the audience today. But we received information in September that not in September, we received information a couple weeks ago that the Goblin Trail from 2020 received a first place award with Ohio Parks and Recreation Association for the Awards of Excellence, which the recreation programming, the category that it was placed first in, sees a lot of entries all across the state. So the fact that not only did we place, but received a first place award is also very proud of that. And then with the special events recreation program, we are meeting our goals with 27% recovery for the year to date. Moving into the Parks Division, and this, again, I think you're all aware of what the Parks Division does, but I thought it important to just kind of note it's more than just mowing grass and picking up trash. There's a lot of maintenance that goes on. There's a lot of the behind the scenes. I think the thing that our team is, if you don't notice what's being done, but you notice that it's an impressive park, if you notice that things are clean, we've done our job. So there's, again, very proud of the amount of work that the team has put in, especially with a lot of new staff and a lot of new leadership. So moving on to the next slide, you'll see some improvements that have been complete for the 2021 season. Again, I won't go through these specifically. Call out a few. If you've been to the golf course, which I think, based on the numbers, so there are a lot of people have, there were some improvements made to the pro shop as well as the clubhouse. We have seen an increase of reservations in the clubhouse as well. It had a nice facelift for improving the ability to reserve the space. Also notably, the Giroux Herb Garden. There was a volunteer program that was put in place. So every Wednesday for a few hours, volunteer members came and worked with our horticulturist and started to really transition the space into what it needs to be. It unfortunately had been left to what we were able to do based off of staffing numbers. So now we're able to put some actual strategy into what it should be and what it can be. So our horticulturist, Tim, has a great vision for that and is already in action to get it moving. Our last slide is park improvements that are in progress. So if you've been out to Headley Park, you'll see the new playground is mostly complete. There will be a 2 to 5 year old structure that will come. You won't see that until about January. We also have the Woodside Green parking lot, which has come in front of council as well, and improvements to the Friendship Park. Tennis courts will be transitioned to pickleball courts. That was with some funding approved by the Parks and Recreation Foundation. So that is the end of the updates. I'm happy to answer any questions if you have them.
Marissa?
Yeah, just a clarifying question. The recovery percentage, is that just operations or is that capital and maintenance, like facilities maintenance too?
It is operational and staffing. It does not include capital.
Okay, thank you.
Is the splash pad completed yet?
It is not complete. We did receive the approvals through Ohio Department of Health for our inspections. So we will see that it'll be complete by the end of the year.
Okay, all right. I've seen little bits of it, I didn't know. All right,
Yes,
thank
it
you.
is. It's great to see dirt moving. So yes, it's in action.
Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, next, items from the Department of Public Service and Engineering.
Good evening, Council. The first 3 items that we have for you this evening are our standard quarterly supplementals for damage to city property, sale of assets, and water meter fees.
Should we take them all at once? Anybody have any questions with any of those ordinances? Okay, so then we will just, I assume they can be on consent. So we'll have introduction next week. They'll need to come back to committee and then on for final vote at the second council meeting from now. Okay, we'll do that way. Thanks.
Mr. Moorhead will kick us off on our last item.
Good evening, Grant. I expected a longer introduction there. Item 4 here is a request for an ordinance authorizing the mayor to enter into contract with Fishbeck for professional services related to Creekside flood mitigation Phase 1. So if you recall, this is a project that has been ongoing since the beginning of the mayor's term and sometime in late 2019. Excuse me. We began coordinating with FEMA to reconcile some records about the flood protections at the Creekside facility. In March of 2020, we had DLZ Engineering engaged to do an analysis of the facility, an investigation of what was out there at the time to determine whether or not we could solve the matter and get the records we needed then. They produced a report in September 2020, and since that time, we've been coordinating with FEMA on a corrective action plan of how to proceed forward. So the short version of DLZ's October report was that we did not have the appropriate level of floodproofing at that development. And since that time, we've been working with FEMA to develop a plan moving forward to achieve that. In July of this year, we sought proposals from 16 firms across the country to help us move forward this project and begin planning for the eventual construction and renovations of the garage that would get us where we need to be. We received responses to that request and evaluated them, and Fishbeck was the selected consultant with the most relevant experience and best prepared to lead us forward into this next phase. They are the head of a consulting team that includes a number of folks, landscape architects, planners, structural engineers, electrical engineers, and architects as well. They hail from Michigan, at least the folks who are going to be most engaged with this project, have extensive experience with flood-proofing commercial structures around the Grand River in Michigan that has experienced some flooding along its banks, and a number of commercial garages, and especially. They've helped us move forward. So the contract before you tonight is focused on phase 1 of a multi-phase process. It will begin evaluating both the facility and what steps can be taken to achieve flood protections out there that FEMA would require. We've brought this contract and its scope to FEMA to evaluate with them whether these are the appropriate next steps, and they agree and look forward to us pursuing this process. As I said, they are the lead consultant here, so in the attachments, you'll see quotes and numbers from other consulting firms. Just understand those are working as subcontractors to Fishbeck in this phase. They were selected again through a large, broad sweeping request for proposals from firms across the country who specialize in this work, and we do think that we're in good hands with them. With that, I'll leave you to any questions.
Questions? Brian?
Just curious, with regard to this particular project with flood mitigation, are there any grants or other funding opportunities available through FEMA, Army Corps of Engineers, any of the other parties that typically work with regard to water remediation problems?
Yes, there are, and that is one of the services that we've requested that this team provide as we go forward. FEMA Go, and then it's called BRIC, B-R-I-C, are a couple of the opportunities. Those would be applied for through the state ODNR, and they would be our applicant for that, and we would put together a request once we're further along in the design phase. They provide grant funding for remediation work, but not design.
Sure. Okay. Thank you.
So this contract will be just for designing how to fix it, not actually fixing it, right?
So this would be laying out a process of what options are available to fix it.
Okay.
We wouldn't get into the actual preliminary design of those options until we have assessed them and selected the route that we think is the best choice for the city.
Okay. Would this company do the design, or would that, okay.
Yes, yes,
Once
they-
they identify what is appropriate, then they would do the design too?
Yes, they would.
Okay. Any other questions, Marissa?
What's the expected timeline for the deliverable on this contract?
They are expecting roughly 4 months to be their deliverable, so from the time that the contract can be executed, which based on the council legislative timeline will be sometime in January, they're expecting to get us feedback from this initial phase in the second quarter, 2022.
And you'll share that with, is there a plan to share that with council in terms of workshops or engagement?
I
Beyond
believe that is the case, yes, that we do plan to workshop and evaluate those options.
Okay.
Once we see what their recommendations are, we'll figure out what the best way is. If that's, there's any further action that needs to be taken from council, whether that's a workshop, special meeting that's required, we'll work with you to figure out what the best mechanism is for that.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay. You okay with this on consent agenda?
Let's put it on regular, just because
Okay.
it's such a large contract.
All right, so we will have the, on for first reading, no need to come back to committee, and then it'll be on the regular agenda. Okay. Do we have an update?
Yes, yeah, I do have a brief update for you this evening. We've received some questions recently about the former yard waste drop-off at our service complex. I wanted to provide some background on that and some additional information about that. So this area has been a challenge, to say the least, for a number of years and for a number of reasons. One of the top reasons is security of the complex. The yard waste drop-off is right in the heart of our service complex, surrounded by equipment, materials, vehicles. On many occasions, I would say at least upwards of 6 times a year, we'll come in the morning and find that the pistons are sheared off of our gate, but nothing's missing, but there is additional yard waste. So people have literally broke into our facility to drop yard waste, which is certainly a security issue. Management of the yard waste drop-off has been a ongoing issue and quite frankly a monumental feat. On many occasions, people will just drive up, block our access to the site, block access to the materials and the area that we need to utilize. I personally was affected by this many a times as a utility operator, to where I needed to dump our vac truck working a water break, and I couldn't because my access is blocked by either yard waste or someone dropping off yard waste. Employees work, I would say, almost daily and sometimes daily, pushing, compacting, trying to organize the yard waste and filling dumpsters. You have to stay on top of it, or it'll get overrun, and then you cannot access the site anymore. The other challenge we've had is with a decent amount of contamination. Tubs, mattresses, tires, decks, you name it, it's all been dropped off. We've replaced our signage many of times to try and correct that. Of course, that only goes so far. We have replaced the dumpsters with different options many a times, and that did not correct it. So we looked at what services are currently available, and there's a handful of them. One of the main services is there is curbside collection at the household. It is unlimited collection, so you can put as much leaves and yard waste you want out there. We do understand that that some people, may not want to bundle their twigs, and they just want to drop it off, or they want to get rid of their leaves quicker than waiting for their next collection day. So there are two other facilities adjoining the city that take yard waste free of charge. One is a really close neighbor, that's Ohio Mulch. They take all of your yard waste, your grass clippings, your leaves, all for free. Branches, twigs, and bushes up to 1/4 inch, all for free. They have a processing facility there where they mulch it up and turn it into whatever it might be, mulch, dirt. If it is over 1/4 inch, they do charge $36 a load. And then the other facility is Kurtz Brothers. That's in Westerville. You can take pretty much anything there for free. When it stops being free, it's a huge load. It has to be over 8 feet, which I don't think anyone's pickup truck can handle an 8-foot log. So those facilities are there. They're available. They're free of charge to the residents. They're sustainable. They're economical. And quite frankly, it's a bit better on the environment. How our facility had run was we would pile it up and we would stuff into a dumpster, and that dumpster would be collected and dropped off at one of these facilities. Each additional dumpster pool is $450. So it's creating more fuel usage, more employee usage, to try and manage that when these facilities are our neighbors right next door to us, and they're free, and that's what they're set up to do. We did check with other neighboring municipalities, and no other municipality other than one, which is Worthington, offers a yard waste dump. So your Hilliards, your Dublins, New Albany, Reynoldsburg, Whitehall, all of them except Worthington do not have this. What we did find is that some of them do offer some seasonal cleanup days, and that's something that we've started exploring is, can we initiate a seasonal cleanup day? Is this something that our citizens would want? That'd be beneficial to them. Maybe open it up in spring and fall to allow them some additional capacity. Granted, it would not be necessarily a sustainable operation because we still have to pack it up and manage it for days and weeks. But if this is a benefit and it is desired by residents, it's certainly something that we're looking into to see if we can move forward with that. So I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions?
Can we have a vac trucks back instead of seasonal cleanup days?
Have a what? I'm sorry?
Can we have the vac trucks back, the vacuum trucks back for leaves instead of seasonal cleanup days? That's my vote.
That is something that was explored in depth a couple of years ago. I wasn't directly involved in all the information gathering. It's an extremely expensive venture, which includes additional staffing and equipment, and it was ultimately determined really by everyone that that's not something that we could unfortunately take on.
It was done many years in a row, but it became just overwhelming.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
If all the leaves fell at the same rate at the same time, it would be better, but they don't. Yeah.
Just I had two constituents several years ago inquire about that path, and in fact, it was around the timing of that discussion, and in fact, followed up with them several years later, and my understanding is that the science has even changed on best practice as far as environmental benefits of either using the energy and everything associated with it, or having it more of a natural process, or individuals taking care of it on their own. So even that had changed in that period of time.
I have one follow-up,
Yeah.
one follow-up question. Is there any kind of public media sort of plan to get the information out about not using the yard waste drop-off site, or how that's changing?
I'm not exactly sure if we have posted something. I don't know off the top of my head. We have updated our website, of course. We've compiled some information of these other locations. And we have the information ready to share with our residents, to let them know that you can go to Ohio Mulch, and it's free there as well. It's, real close to us. Same thing with Kurtz Brothers. So we can definitely work with our marketing to make sure that that's shared appropriately.
Yeah, that'd be a great idea. Thank you.
Okay, all right, thank you. Okay, next. Items from the Department of Economic Development.
Better now? Better now? Yeah, here we go. Good evening, everyone, and I appreciate the time to present these items to the council. Before you are a full couple of items. The first two are interrelated. I believe 0083 and 0084 are related to Project Gall. This was a project that I brought to the council maybe 6 weeks ago. At that time, we discussed inclusion of TIF dollars from the Central Park Tax Increment Financing District to support public infrastructure improvements tied to the project. In that time, I've been able to reach out to the Ohio Department of Transportation and the Ohio Department of Development to identify proceeds and opportunities to support the project. As you'll see in the tables included on both the reports, we have been successful in procurement of just under $357,000 to support the project for the public infrastructure improvements along Tech Center Drive. The first being through Jobs and Commerce Fund, which is the 0083 ordinance, and the second being through the Ohio Department of Development 6929 program for about $280,000. The first one, 0083, the grant application is included. That was given to us directly from ODOT. The second one is unfortunately an electronic document, so I had to put in some more additional work. I didn't want to go too far in that application process without coming back and checking with the council to make sure we are properly authorized to pursue and accept those dollars. In speaking with our Public Works team, in both those instances, the procurement process, we can assign those dollars to a developer or a contractor. My suggestion to the council would be to assign those dollars along with our procurement policies to the developer in question here, and then they would be required to go through the public bidding process as per code for the city of Gahanna, and also include any federal non-discrimination, state non-discrimination language as required within the grant contract itself. In speaking with our partners at ODOD and ODOT, they don't have any guidance related to procurement. They default to the local regulations. So in speaking with Mr. Moorhead, in particular this morning, publicly advertised, no domestic steel, prevailing wage, all those would be tied to this project long term. So would welcome any questions you might have about either of those items.
Any questions? Any questions? Okay, so are you okay with these two items moving forward and being on consent agenda? Okay, so we will have first reading of 83 and 84 at the next meeting. No need to come back to committee, and then consent agenda at the following meeting.
Wonderful, thank you very much. For 0085, I wanted to apologize. I had some typographical language left in the original report, so there should have been a revised report issued to the council earlier today. This is a project over on Agler Road. This is Ohio Exteriors, existing business. They're in a converted home that's now their home office. Their office contacted, I believe it was Mr. Blackford's office originally, about some building permits and zoning clarifications, and then inquired about a possible CRA inclusion. The property is located within the city's CRA number 5, this is a pre-1994 CRA. Given that it's a remodel of their existing facility, they're entitled to a 12-year, 100% abatement on the improved values. Now, I will caveat this for the council members. As always is the case with CRAs, it's really challenging to kind of figure what that improved value estimate would be. It's oftentimes a lot simpler if you're doing a new building and saying I'm going to put $600,000 into a new space and what that could be assessed as. But given that's a remodeled facility they're investing in, specifically creating a showroom and some warehousing space in the rear, it really is at the discretion of the assessor as to whether or not how that value is determined and if it's currently increased or what have you, or remains level set. So really, the ROI calculations on this have essentially assumed a discounted rate. You'll see some of the numbers of what we're looking at, what the current values are, what we're assuming that $600,000 of investment relates to, and then what the value of the new tax abatement is. As I mentioned earlier, when doing a remodeling in sense, they still pay their original taxes on the property. So this is only capturing the net new increment assessed on the property. So we are projecting that the city's loss of taxable revenue is just under $10,000 on the project. You see the returns on investment, and I can send this to you, the members of the council, in an Excel document so they can actually see the backside formulas, if that's helpful. But really what bolsters this is the expansion of their workforce on site. They're both full-time equivalents as well as the subcontractors that they plan on engaging as part of their home remodeling and expansion business. So I'll welcome any questions you might have on that project.
Any questions? Are you the housing officer?
Yes, I am.
Okay. I don't remember that term before.
It's a term that's only utilized for CRAs.
Okay.
And it's the omnibus term for those who are authorized to execute the CRA agreements themselves. And so by statute, the Economic Development Director is the housing officer.
I've known the guy that owns it for a long time, so it's a growing business. I mean, he just started out as a small.
Oh, that's what he said. He's been growing leaps and bounds at his
Yeah.
space, and actually I'm excited that we're able to keep him potentially in the city of Gahanna versus looking at a new build somewhere else in one of the other communities.
Okay, any questions? I mean, any problems with it being on consent?
I have a question.
Oh, you have a question? I'm sorry, I missed it.
Did you too? No. Could you repeat again just about the school compensation?
Oh, absolutely.
Aspect? I'm sorry, if you could go over that one more time for me.
Sure. So if you look at the ROI worksheet in front of you, it's calculated at a 12-year basis. So unlike other new build construction areas in the pre-94 CRA, which would be entitled to a 15-year incentive, this is only 12. And the other real key thing here, as Councilwoman, is because it's a remodeling versus a new build, we're only capturing that new increment developed under that abatement process. Everything that he's paying, that the business is paying today, will remain in effect for the duration. So it actually lessens the impacts necessary to the schools. The biggest impact actually ends up being the forfeiture of new TIF revenues that are noted here on, I think, maybe line 7 of the actual document, because it was in our current TIF district. But we would be doing potentially a non-school TIF on this project long-term, or recapturing as part of the TIF over there and post-abatement consideration. But the school compensation arrangement is the 50% of the loss that we generated on the project plus 50% of the net new on the wages. So that's where that valuation of about $167,000 comes in from. When you take the loss of what that new valuation was, 50% plus the net new value, which is $228,000, about half of that would be going to the schools as part of their existing relationship. Does that make sense? And again, I can send this to you as an Excel document so you can see the backside formulas if that's helpful.
I think so, yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay,
Can we have it on regular?
yes.
Thank you.
Not a problem.
Okay, so we will have no need to come, first reading, no need to come back to committee, and then a regular agenda for 85.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. And then last but certainly not least is a long-time project that my office inherited when I first joined the city. So this is for Ordinance Authorizing to Execute into a developer's agreement with the partners around the Mill Street project. A little bit of background on this for the members who may or may not be highly familiar with this project. It's my understanding that this project's been in development for about 3 years. The mayor and my predecessor, Dr. Goss, inherited this project earlier part of their tenure. worked on it consecutively with Mr. Doug Matty and Mr. Matt Vicasi quite regularly on the project, and was focused at that time on both sides of Mill Street. We call the west side where the Shampooch property is, as well as where the fitness, as well as where the east side is. This is where the plant library and the EMH&T property is, located in our downtown Creekside area. My first engagement with the project, quite frankly, was my 5th day in the office when I first had a chance to connect with Mr. Vicasi and Mr. Matty, and I shared with them some pretty blunt thoughts about the scale and size on both sides of the street with the project, but I asked them to, continue moving the project forward, and we'll see if we can find a comparable resolution. At that time, the mayor and I worked tirelessly with new personalities, members of their team come in, I think early July, to continue the conversation around what could be salvaged as part of the project. And what this project is strictly the east side. So this is where the EMH&T building is, the vacation of North Street, and the plant library former car wash site. The property would include a 5-story building with the facade being a 4-story facade with the 5th story pulled back. Some of the larger hang-ups on the project historically were the hammerhead turnaround, which are included in this project. When North Street would be vacated, it would allow for larger scale trucks, delivery vehicles, and things of that nature. So 20, 24-foot size vehicles coming back in through the property and being able to do a proper turnaround and leave the property. Our largest concern in that space actually was not even delivery trucks. Think like U-Hauls and Penske trucks for residents who are coming into the property was a primary concern and driver there, as well as the widening of Wilson Alley as obviously traffic continues to increase over there. I know Councilman Schnetzer has shared with me multiple times his concern around a traffic impact study and what this would mean if North Street was vacated. There is a former study that showed, I think it was 37 vehicles in a peak condition in 2019 on North Street was the primary driver there. And so those vehicles could be easily rerouted and was considered de minimis in that initial analysis. The real challenging here, quite frankly, though, was when you combine both sides of the street. I've said this to the partnership here multiple times. It felt like it was a very high lift when you're asking for moving and shifting of easements for bicycle lanes. Rock Park was included as part of an initial ask for that councilwoman. The vacation of North Street, the CRA. It just felt like it was a very large list and it was a very hard list to get through. And in this instance, it's the vacation of North Street and the relocation of the utilities therein, which we will not be responsible for. And the pre-94 CRA was the inclusions. So that's where we are today. One of the things that I would ask, I know this project has a lot of hair on it, meaning that there's just been so much conversation and discussion around it that if interested, I realize next week is a 5th Monday week, and many of you may have other plans during the week. But if you're interested, I would ask if we spend a time, I would encourage the developers to come in to a meeting specifically on this item and formally present to this body to review the project, its status changes, what's happening, and invite the public to that conversation as well, if you're so inclined or interested in doing so. So to that, I open up for any questions you might have.
Questions? Can I ask, I didn't find anywhere in here where it said how many parking spaces there are.
Yes, ma'am. There are 74 units, and I can go back and look at the document, but it's self-parks, meaning that there are no I think there's, and I'm going to turn to my friend in the planning department, because I'm not a parking specialist by any means. But when we say self-parks, does that mean it parks itself? Like physically puts its own self in a parking
This is
spot?
automated cars.
Not familiar with using that term, but if you're parking being met on site, I think what you're
Parking.
that it doesn't need any variances.
There are no anticipated variances for the parking.
And I think they were actually, as part of the renderings, they were planning on using the parking lot with that.
Oh, yes, sorry. There are 2 sites that would be dedicated, or 3 sites that would be dedicated on the parking lot adjacent to this site that's owned by Mr. Matty. But otherwise, the property has its own enclosed parking spaces. There's no anticipated major bleed out or impacts to surrounding. The original question was about putting cars into the Creekside garage and things of that nature, and that is not part of this request.
So how many, I guess,
I can find out that question for you.
Okay.
I don't have that number off the top
So
of my head.
they'll be allowed to park on the property that has Mr. Matty owns next door?
They would be deeding 3 spaces, it's my understanding, to ensure
What
that
if he changed, what if somebody else buys it? That's not,
they're deeded to that site, ma'am.
okay. All right, if you could get that number.
Yes, ma'am.
Any other question? Michael?
Yeah. Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Strum, appreciate the information here. I'm wondering, can you, high level,
Yes, sir.
what are some of the key bullet points to the development agreement that's in front of us? And I want to, the reason why I'm asking that is your comment earlier, you said, historically, this project has had a lot of hair.
A lot of hair.
What I see is they're cutting away a considerable portion of it, and presumably some of that hair as well. What remains, what hair, if any,
Absolutely.
remains? Can you
So
touch on
the
just some
principal
of the?
2 asks of this body are considerations around the pre-94 CRA for the property. This would be an abatement on the improved values for a term of 15 years at 100%. And then secondly would be the vacation of North Street. Those are the 2 asks of the developer's agreement. They asked for some timelines to tie down the property and you'll see some language around the extension of the purchase arrangement that would then void this if and when it is never consummated, as well as the revocation of the vacation of North Street. But ultimately, those are the 2 asks. And in lieu of compensation, paying for North Street, they're asking for considerations by this body to do some public art installations on the grounds, as well as participation in local, I think they're referenced in the original agreement, Chamber of Commerce membership, sponsorship of events, CDA membership, things of that nature, in lieu of actually paying for the $40,000 for the land.
Just a couple follow-ups, if I may.
Yeah.
Can you touch on the CRA? Is it true that effectively anything that goes in within the boundary more or less qualifies? Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
As a pre-94 CRA, there's a limited capacity that any elected body can actually do unless it goes into a post situation.
Okay. Then again, going back to some of the other asks, historically speaking, there was a lot of debate over costs of relocating utilities, et cetera, et cetera.
That's all off the table.
So the developer bears that cost.
Yes,
City
sir.
no longer.
There's still a gap in the project, quite frankly. I believe there's close to between $250,000 and $500,000 gap in the project financially for the developer at this point, but they're working through that actively to identify what those cost savings can be measured at. But the city is not anticipating bearing any of those costs.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Yeah.
Could you go over the loss of the school compensation loss and how that specifically works in this project?
Sure.
The number I saw was about 4.4 million.
Yes.
And could you
Correct.
explain how that affects the city specifically from a cost perspective?
Sure, and I do not have the ROI in front of me, but let me wing it a little bit. So a couple things in that ROI that you'll see. Again, similar formula. Actually, it's the same exact formula to the one we just reviewed a moment ago. So it's 50% of the abated valuation. So that loss in the tax, what would ultimately have been seen as a tax gain for the school district, as well as 50% of the net new wages. That's how that number is derived. I can certainly send along the Excel document to help there. But then when you start factoring in, and I didn't include this, but there are data points around this alternatively. We note the improvement of the building itself, the net new wages, and then there is perceived improvement, and I have the data to demonstrate that as well. Work from home wages are real in this instance, and so young professionals and metro renters, thank you, ma'am. I appreciate it, Mayor. We would have a potential significant impact from work from home wages, as 35% of the workforce currently works at a full-time work from home status, and those would be the targeted demographics tied to this project. So it's actually a low number that I included in there for $1 million. I believe that number could be significantly higher, which would be a substantial new revenue source for the city. I'm just going to scroll down here for one moment. Mr. Larrick and I have had multiple comments around this, and I can certainly rerun these numbers as well. We did include the real value of the building. We could do an assessed value of the building to show a different valuation here. A $25 million apartment building is probably going to be assessed in 15 years of somewhere around $10 to $12 million versus that 14 number you see there. So that would lower that ROI by 10%, but certainly not more than 25 or 30% degradation. So you would still have a substantial return on investment to the city long term. Plus, quite candidly, and the numbers I didn't include in here would be the spending capital of the residents in the existing area. I know when I've engaged with the Creekside District Alliance and other business owners down there, having new density and residents living in the area to support their businesses, even assuming once every 2 weeks, could be a substantial impact from a spending capital in the neighborhood.
Okay.
And I did not include those numbers in this formula.
Just a couple follow-ups. I note that these are market rate units. They're all
Yes.
being targeted. Any set-asides for attainable housing or capped percentage, targeting a capped percentage for workforce?
I specifically asked that question to the developer, and none are planned at this time.
Well, they might not be planned, but if there was some push on that, would that be a consideration?
Based on the existing financial gap already experiencing by the developer, I don't believe they're having that under consideration.
Okay. And any environmental LEED certifications that are being pursued or other types of, I know the runoff was an issue that was discussed, I think the last time this was brought up.
Yes, and that was on the west side building, so that was one closest to the creek. There's no concerns around runoff or stormwater. To your question around LEED, that's actually a very good timely idea, and something that the Sustainability Committee for the city has taken under advisement. We do not have those standards in place currently within the city from a CRA standpoint, but my office is currently evaluating what we could be doing as other CRA applications come forward in the future to include LEED certification or other international standards to promote more sustainable development, but we do not have anything on the books at this time.
Did we talk with them about PACE financing for their construction? I
We
thought
have.
did.
We have. PACE is still a little too costly from a financial standpoint. We are working with them in the Magnet Fund with Franklin County about some of the utility relocation options. And that would be through Franklin County Economic Community Development Office.
I had one question. It's more about the building itself.
Yes, ma'am.
It says it's set back, but how far from the sidewalk that's there now, will it be set back from the sidewalk or just, before it was right up to the edge of the sidewalk?
Sure. I do not have that distance in front of me, Councilwoman.
Okay.
Again, given the history and legs on this project, if interested, I'd be more than happy to help facilitate a public discussion around the project. I could have that question also answered by the developer.
I just couldn't tell from, it said set back, but I
I'm
couldn't
pretty
figure
sure
out the.
it's going to be, if it's not on the line, it's going to be, it's close, would be my assumption.
4 feet?
Michael, do you have a comment? Or John?
According to the site plan, it's 4 feet, but this is all very conceptual, preliminary. It has to go through the entire planning commission process.
So 4 feet back from the sidewalk currently?
Back from the right of way, not the sidewalk. Sidewalks usually located within the right of way.
So 4 feet from the curb?
From the right of way, I don't know where exactly the right of way is.
Okay.
Improvements within there. That's probably a fairly good guess. John probably knows more. But this is all very preliminary.
Yeah, it's all very,
I just couldn't tell. Okay.
Sure.
I'll spitball this. From the site diagram again, it's roughly 6 feet from the edge of the walks that are out there now. So from where the walks are on Mill Street, 6 feet from that.
Get
so
up
basically
here.
my height.
So we can hear you. No comments from the peanut gallery. Come on up to the table.
Mr. Blackford at least projected well.
Got all this nice AV equipment. I'm just yelling from the background. So the site plan that's attached to this agreement, the front of the building is roughly 6 to 7 feet offset from the sidewalk, from the back of the sidewalk along
Okay.
Mill Street. So
All
it's
right.
4 feet from the right-of-way line, but roughly 3 feet from the sidewalk facing
Okay.
Mill Street.
All right.
And Mr. Blackford also slipped me a note. 74 spaces will be required for the project. Based on the preliminary plans that were previously submitted, I assume 69 would be required. 69 spaces would be required for the project, and I believe that they have committed to make sure that all 74 would be available in a deed-restricted capacity, available to residents. So there would not be any neighborhood impacts necessarily. It would be dedicated spaces for the apartment community.
Okay, all right. Michael?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Mr. Strum, again, I apologize for kind of harping on the past.
I'm good with it. I knew this was going to happen with this project. There's a lot of hair on it.
Well, I just want to make sure that we're entering into this with our eyes wide open.
Sure.
So under a hypothetical scenario where this is approved, what sort of control after, again, in a hypothetical, you enter into the agreement, what sort of control does the city council have over how this moves forward? I guess we've heard that everything is very, very preliminary at this point.
So let's go to the Planning Commission. Michael, you can probably speak better to variances and anything that need to come forward to council, if at all, during the planning process.
Well, I'm sorry for being guilty of what we do at Planning Commission. That's people yelling from the audience. So this project, hasn't really had any submittals in over a year and a half, so it's really preliminary right now to be talking about site plans and design. That's Planning Commission. I don't anticipate any of those variances or any of those applications coming before City Council. Everything in the past has been, the design, the variances are all approvable with Planning Commission, which I think is the question.
Brick exterior, finishes, I mean, those things have all been kind of worked out and agreed to and thought of cognitively. I know we had some discussions last week with some council members around modern versus more traditional aesthetic feel. But I think what you see opportunity-wise is what the project ultimately will look like. But again, that's also why I would encourage any contingency language that you want to put into this agreement. I think the council has a robust capacity to do so. And again, I would encourage that if inclined and have a capacity or availability to have them come in even the week out, next week to kind of review the project, and then from there, this body can make an informed decision as well as put any contingencies or language they wish to put in there to put any clawbacks or cancellations in, depending on the final product.
Thank you, sir.
Marissa?
Any consideration, or what's the status of inclusion of any type of retail, like a bodega or a cafe?
Wonderful question. We did have that ongoing conversation with the space. There was an initial design rendering that gave, I think it was 2,000 square feet, Mayor?
2,000 square feet on the west side.
On the west side of that building, closest to the alleyway. And then they showed us the numbers as to what that cost would be, and inquired, given that they didn't have any prospects for it, you're talking $25 to $30 a square foot in that space. And that's the market rate, and they're not wrong with that market, quite frankly. That is the going rate for, new build, vanilla box, commercial. And if the city would be interested in taking that on to go either find someone to fill it, or the city would take it on from a master lease standpoint, and then go fill it ourselves, I politely but firmly decline that option. And candidly, in talking with our M&A team on the downtown or the Creekside redevelopment opportunities, one of the things I'd highlight is it really kind of pushes more retail, first floor retail commercialization activation on other redevelopment sites within the area. But quite candidly, having the density of the population down there will drive a lot of initial activity, both on the Creekside side as well as in the historic areas around the neighborhood.
I would also add to that, one of the things that we have heard, not only from M&A, but certainly repeatedly, is the fact that the ability to attract retail down to that area really is going to be dependent upon having the heads or the feet. You need the foot traffic there first, and then the retail will come after that. So to Director Strum's point, having the density in that area for the foot traffic first will then lead to retail in the area.
And higher uses of retail and a more diverse mixture of retail options.
Yes, Karen?
There were, Mrs. McGregor and I were at the tour. We were going around on Friday. I don't know how many others are going to be able to do this on Tuesday, but it was very nice to see it because it gives you some ideas of what can happen in there. And the fact that I think that this particular, the facades that are going to be there are going to be filling in to what we have on the other side.
I would agree with that. When you see some of the renderings that are included in your packet this evening, one of the things that we talked a lot about on last week's tour, and we'll talk again tomorrow for our afternoon kind of, I'm going to call fam tour a little bit, is really the blend of updated facades with the more traditionalist views of what's going on down there. You do want to have that level of contrast, aesthetically speaking. You don't want a full homogeneous perspective in the neighborhood. And you want to keep identity. You want to keep some of that character while still, being in line with other design elements. So a lot of brick, stucco, just different colors, I think, kind of bring out some vibrancy in the area in general. But then I do really appreciate their inclusion of potential public art as part of this as well. I think they noted in the draft agreement of inclusion of working with the schools or other designated nonprofit to do some sculpture, mural, similar of the like in the area too, to kind of do something meaningful in that space.
When I saw the thing about the public art, the building takes up so much of the space, I'm thinking like, where do they even put it?
So
I mean, are they talking out on-site or somewhere else?
On site. So I think you can do some sculpture in the landscaping areas in the front of the building. You can also do some full wall muraling. Just depends on what the design comes back as and what, as a body and as a community, we want to see kind of done over there.
Okay. So to Michael's question, once we approve this developers agreement, pretty much it has to go through planning, but we have no more say into how it's going to be developed after that,
Well, as I mentioned, you can.
unless we put things into the developers
Yes,
agreement now.
I would think that, my suggestion would be if this council's so inclined to help me host a public forum on the project, we can review this as a community, talk through it with them a little bit, and then depending on the temperature of the council, Mr. Malarski, myself, and the council members could potentially add some clawback languages or cancellation language, if you so are inclined, to kind of make sure everyone's kind of sees this project in the same light and is comfortable with it moving forward.
Okay. All right, thank you. So do we want to schedule a meeting for Monday? I don't know, it's not a scheduled Monday. I mean, it's,
It doesn't have to be Monday.
You're
You could
off,
pick
but we can do any day.
any day
next
but
week.
Thursday, because I just sent you all an invite for the comm center on Thursday.
we could do it at the next committee meeting, you're saying?
I said, well,
Your call.
I mean, that's up
I
to
mean,
you.
it's up to you, what do you,
I think whatever.
The
it-
13th, you mean?
I
Michael?
would almost suggest a regular meeting of council, since those tend to go quicker than our committee meetings.
okay.
Especially with finance.
So like, you mean like after the regular meeting or before?
December,
I mean, after as part of it?
December 6th,
Okay,
whatever that is.
all right.
Rather than the Friday or the Monday that we're not having any meetings at all.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Okay, all right. All right. Thank you.
I appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Do we want to put this on for first reading, or do we want to wait a bit for?
Put it on for first reading.
You what?
I would say put it on for first reading.
I think
All right.
first reading is certainly appropriate.
Okay.
First reading, then public meeting afterwards. Let's do this.
I was just asking that question of Mr. Malarski. So a public discussion, public hearing on the 6th? Is that?
That's what I'm thinking.
Okay, just want to make
What
sure
would
so
the
we can.
hearing be? A hearing is a formality that, I
Or
don't know that that's what we're
workshop
talking
discussion.
about.
I'm trying, that's
Yeah.
what I'm trying to get clarification so that we know what we should be
I
promoting
like
for
the
the
idea of a
community.
public workshop on the project for presentation and then
Exactly.
robust Q&A.
Yeah. that sounds good.
Could we do it after the meeting, just after the meeting? Just have a public workshop?
Is the, if I'm,
Oh, no, go ahead.
is the concept here a presentation or a visit? We're talking about something in chambers?
In chambers, if
Then I would recommend an agenda item in the agenda. And if it goes 5 minutes, it goes 5 minutes. We would put a cap of time on it of 15, 20 minutes and do something along those lines. It would just be incorporated into the regular meeting as a topic of a workshop discussion on this item.
well, we could do, if if I may be so bold, include it as first reading, and then as part of that first reading,
It would be a separate block in the agenda, but I'll talk to Crystal, we'll work through that.
But the official public meeting is so formalized, it's like not,
This wouldn't have to be.
okay. Michael?
Well, conceptually, I'm just trying to run through. I was under the impression there would be some sausage making on December 6th, that we would be, there would be back and forth talking about some of the contingencies that were desired, how feasible they would be,
That would be
poison pills
committee.
if they need to occur. And my understanding is that would not occur within a regular meeting. It would be a supplemental afterwards.
That's what I was thinking too. Like
Yeah,
a-
I agree.
So is that a
Chair,
special meeting
Yeah, go ahead.
afterwards?
Just to add to what Councilman Snetzer was saying, and we also would like to, if I heard you correctly, which I totally agree with, invite the public and have them comment on this as well.
Right.
So that's necessary and needed.
So would that be like a special meeting and then workshop, like, and this topic, the agenda item of the workshop, of the special meeting would be a workshop?
Yeah, for the sake of time, I was going with Councilwoman McGregor's, just to do it after our regular meeting and host something.
Yep, I like that.
The only caution would be, that's a little bit of an unpredictable time frame. It would seem to make sense to have it be a fixed time, I mean, typically, when an event of this nature is done, it's 6 o'clock, that's the event, it's the workshop, it's the activity, it's the presentation, it's the discussion, that's what it is. That would be the case if this is larger than something that would take 15 or 20 minutes. So if it's a shortish thing, then it would easily seem to fall into something that could be compartmentalized within the regular meeting. If it is a more formalized project, and I'm thinking back to what, more or less what our city engineer did, some time ago, where he, on a particular infrastructure item that needed to be addressed, would have pictures and images and discussion, and public involved, et cetera, and that would be a fixed thing that occurred at a specific time. It doesn't have to be 6, it could be something else, but those would be a couple of examples of things that we've done in the past that would fit what I think I'm hearing is on the table.
I think that would be more in line. I think there'd be a robust conversation with some I like.
So there's the question, and to that point, is that legislative change? Is it change to this agreement? Is that what you're discussing? Because that would go to committee and/or discussion within the meeting itself.
To give us time.
What you have
to
is
get
two
the
things. You've got
information.
public discussion, presentation, overview, question and answer, all of that. That is fundamentally a separate activity from council's discussion and deliberation and debate about additions, changes, adjustments to an agreement.
Yeah, I understand what you're driving at. I guess I was looking forward to the opportunity to discuss with the developer, with the administration present, with council, some of the contingencies so effectively shaping the agreement.
Now, that would,
But it'd be a three-party type of, council, administration, and developer, all working together,
council administration and
the developer.
that would be
There's
committee.
some things, frankly, they're not going to be amenable to. And we need to hear that directly from them, and
I barely pull off being an economic development director. I am not a private developer on any stretch of the imagination.
Have we not previously done something where we had presented an agreement, it was sent back to committee? So I guess what I'm saying is, could we presented it tonight, we schedule a special meeting, we have that dialogue, the sausage-making session, so to speak. It goes back to committee on the 13th with the chance to incorporate whatever we learned from the sausage-making session, the special meeting. I mean, we've done that, something similar to that before, have we not?
Ordinarily, all of that discussion is within committee and includes the developer at hand. Any questions the council may have, that typically is a committee discussion. It's what the fundamental purpose is. What I'm hearing is we have two things. One, we want a broader discussion and presentation. It's not a presentation, but a broader delivery of exactly what this is so people are aware and cognizant of what it is. That's a thing. But when it comes to the debate of the nuances and the changes and the requests, that's our typical activity is that is either can certainly occur within regular meeting as a motion item or during committee, which is what we typically do.
Agreed. I think we were, and
I'm just going to jump
you're
in
looking for
here.
something with more public input opportunity, correct?
Well, I just want to be cognizant of the fact that we all have limited bandwidth, and we are in the middle of budget season, and committee meetings are going to be dominated by budget discussion. So if we tack on an hour-long agenda item on our committee night in addition to budget, I'm concerned about.
And this could be a specific committee item for committee of the whole called on Monday the 6th.
So host
the
committee of
exact
the
same
whole-
thing.
Host committee of the whole December 6th, is what you're saying?
Just have a special committee of the whole on December 6th.
Isn't that what we were just talking about?
It would appear that if, with the budget, et cetera, that perhaps this next Monday would be a better choice for this to be just the main event.
I think we have the time on December 6th to do it again. Our regular meetings are pretty brief for the most part. To have an opportunity to discuss something on that night when we're already here, I think makes sense, as opposed to convening,
I would do a committee of the whole on the 6th.
on a night when we're not scheduled to be here.
So we'll
My
just have,
only concern, the only thing I'm trying to avoid is having a potentially 90-minute budget discussion on the back of a hour-long
Gotcha.
discussion
Yeah,
about
understood.
a developer's agreement. So if we can separate those two, the dates, talk about one on the 6th and the other one on the 13th, I'm fine with that, however you want to do
We
it.
can have a special committee of the whole after our regular meeting, because they've,
Works for me.
That's fine.
and then we will
And
have.
pizza for everyone.
I guess my
I
only.
volunteer to buy that.
Okay, just the only point that I hope that, and there's ways to overcome this, but my only hesitation with it being called a committee of the whole versus a special meeting and coded as a workshop or whatever it is my fear is that we seem to have less public engagement on committee of the whole meetings. And so if we are looking to get some public input and to have an opportunity for the public to give any feedback to us during that process, we don't really have a structure set up for that in a committee of the whole format. So,
We could
I
easily
can
make
Easily do
that
that.
I can
Okay.
call, on- I mean,
fruition.
we can call on anybody during.
Everybody can talk.
Okay, I mean, we could just set out the rules ahead of time that people will be allowed to speak.
Yes.
that's perfect, and that addresses
It's
my
not typically done, but it
Yeah.
doesn't mean we can't do it.
But yeah, but that would address my concern, just to
Okay.
make sure that we want to encourage
concern.
open dialogue.
Okay,
Okay.
all right. So we will have a committee of the whole after the regular meeting on December 6th. Okay,
Thank you very much.
okay.
There's something else.
And this is first reading?
This will be on for first reading on December 6th. All right. Okay, next, Department of Human Resources.
Good evening. I have two items, one for a contract extension for the FOP collective bargaining agreement and one for the FOP OLC collective bargaining agreement. As you know, those agreements both expire at the end of the year. We are currently negotiating with the unions. However, due to scheduling for vacations and holidays and the end of the year scheduling for both parties, we're requesting authorization for the mayor to sign a contract extension and those to be both passed on emergency and waiver. They have to be signed and turned into CERB by the end of the year. If not, we'll be forced into mediation of fact-finding with the union without negotiating. So we would request those to be passed on emergency and waiver.
Any questions? Okay, you okay with them on consent agenda? Okay, all right. These will be on for first reading. Oh, emergency, sorry, it's got emergency.
Nancy, could we put it on regular since it's emergency?
I just saw the
Yeah,
emergency.
thank you.
Yeah, that's fine. I didn't notice that at first. Okay, so we'll have it on, these will be on the regular agenda on December 6th, correct? I'm ahead of you there. Okay, thank you. Okay, Department of Finance.
Good evening. I have one action item in front of you. This is for the Crescent TIF. So it produced more than anticipated, which in turn means that we owe the school more than originally appropriated. So we're requesting a supplemental appropriation in the amount of $23,000 to pay the school their share of those TIF dollars.
Any questions? Okay, you okay with that being on consent?
That's fine.
Okay, so we will do ordinance 82, will be on for first reading, no need to come back to committee, and then consent agenda at the following meeting. All right, that's it. Oh, do you have a department update?
Just wanted to give everybody an update on the procurement policy. As you know, I mentioned previously that it wasn't in line with the uniform guidance required for spending federal dollars. So we currently received a draft back from a consultant that incorporated those federal guidelines. So we're going through our internal review, and then we will have that back out to council probably after the first of the year. Working on the Q3 report to come before the end of the year, and then we're also continue training the new finance manager.
Okay. Question? Okay. All right. Any other questions? All right, thank you. All right, this ends Committee of the Whole. Does anybody want to take a 5-minute break? Bathroom?
Sure.
5-minute break. I've lost my thing here. Nothing's coming up. Maybe it'll come back now.
All right, everybody back in their post. Okay, let's commence Finance Committee for November 22nd, 2021. Just one item on the agenda this evening. It's a budget discussion, Ordinance 0072, 2021, an ordinance to make annual appropriations for current expenses and other expenditures for the city of Gahanna during the fiscal year 2022. Just a couple of housekeeping notes, just as we did the last Finance Committee. Council members have submitted questions to me. I've done my best to combine any duplicates and categorize them into general topics that seem to make sense. I will read the questions into the record and then allow the administration an opportunity to respond, and then refer back to council if there's any follow-up questions or comments. Joanne did come to me and said that we had a consultant on site, so just respect their time. We're going to go a little bit out of order. I'm going to drop down to the human resources section. That's the question dealing with the compensation study. So I will start there and just, again, read the question and then allow the administration to respond. So please provide an overview of the findings of the Clemens, Nelson, and Associates compensation study, the reason for the wage compression, and the recommended resolution. This topic can be found on page 37 of the budget document. So with that, Joanne, or Miranda.
Good evening. We have Brian Butcher and Heidi Miller here from Clemens, Nelson and Associates to give an overview on the compensation study that they conducted on behalf of the city. Thank you, Kevin. I would just like to just give you a little heads up. I'm a lawyer by trade, not a compensation person by trade. So if you do have questions about this study and the compensation rates for the city, I strongly encourage you to ask Brian and Heidi while they're here, because I will have limited information without consulting back with them on specific reasons for things. So with that, Brian, thank you. Thank you, Miranda. Let me make sure this works real quick. There we go.
You're pointing this way?
Pointing this way?
Yep.
Okay. My name is Brian Butcher. Thank you for having me tonight. I am President and CEO of Clemens, Nelson and Associates. We are a human resources and labor relations firm that primarily specializes in the public sector. Heidi Miller is my associate here tonight. She's the brains behind the whole operation and did a lot of the number crunching on the presentation that you will see. We have been tasked with earlier this year in 2021 with reviewing the City of Gahanna's compensation system. Just so you guys know, you guys are not the only public employer doing this right now. It's a statewide movement, and we are a firm who probably does this about as much as any other firm in the state of Ohio. Some shortcut popped up there. That's okay. Let's see. So when we started this, the last time you guys took a real good comprehensive look at your guys' compensation system was back in 2016. And ironically, I was the individual who did it at that time as well. What's changed since 2016 is right now you guys are dealing with a turbulent market. For those of you who are professionals out there in the private sector, you can probably testify that about 30 to 40% of employees out there are looking either to leave their job or have left their job. The data is pretty alarming, and it's not only in the private sector, it's also moved into the public sector. So what employers have tried to do, including your administration, is try to get ahead of it, address turnover issues that may have arisen, and try to keep up with some of the statistical anomalies that are occurring right now across our economy. Some of the main drivers with respect to this compensation review are the typical internal equity, and what internal equity is how jobs value within an organization. For instance, how one job values against the other in the hierarchy of the table of organization, as well as external equity, which is a market survey, which we also did. We also looked at the wage indices, and when I talk about wage indices, I'm talking about the CPI, I'm talking about the ECI, which is the Employment Cost Index, Social Security, PRS, basically forecasting devices that help judge cost of living adjustments. If you have been paying attention and reading the paper, the CPI is up 6.2% in the last year, back to last October. That's the biggest jump since 1990. So the dollar is not going quite as far as it used to. I'm going to start with our recommendations and kind of work our way back. I think some of this is in your budget book, so feel free to jump in whenever you want. We made 4 core recommendations as part of this project. A, shift the wage scale, and I'll go into exactly how much and what that exactly means. B, certain types of collective bargaining-driven adjustments that occur to ensure that you are able to fill jobs within your administration. The market survey itself, as well as certain jobs that may have evolved over time and require job audits, and how we kind of implement this all together and what the final cost would be based upon our recommendations. So the shifting of the wage scale. On the slides you see above, you're going to see the 2021 wage ordinance and a proposed shift of 10%. Now what that means is that we are shifting the minimum and the maximum, the 10%. It does not mean necessarily that every employee throughout the organization is going to get a 10% raise. I would highly suggest if council does adopt our recommendations that you get everybody on the scale at least. That is at least to the minimum. There's also been a movement around the Columbus area with respect to what we call living wage. Living wage is a number that, if you've been following, once again, the headlines, $15 is kind of thrown out there. If you look at the 10% recommendation, $15 kind of starts about pay grade 4. But based upon the data we pulled, the indices, and then the fact that the last adjustment was made in 2016, and it wasn't a significant adjustment at that time, we're recommending a 10% increase to the wage scale. Collective bargaining-driven adjustments. So one of the areas that certain public employers are having a lot of trouble with is ensuring that their administrative positions, for instance, like chief of police, deputy chief of police, that they are getting applicants once those jobs are vacated. And if you're familiar with collective bargaining, and I noticed you guys had something on the agenda with respect to your negotiations tonight, when the pay scales of the collective bargaining agreement are increased, if you do not have what we call a vertical spread that is at least industry standard in place, a lot of times public employers will struggle getting applicants to those administrative jobs because A, you're not in the union anymore, and B, you are at the whim of city council with respect to wage adjustments. You're not necessarily negotiating or collective bargaining those adjustments. So the recommendations that you will see before you establish what we call a rank differential between ranks within the police department. 8% for deputy chief and 12% for chief of police. These are actually very close to the rank differential that has actually been collectively bargained into your guys' contract already, for instance, between sergeants and lieutenants, et cetera, okay? Or patrol to sergeants and then sergeants to lieutenants. The third set of recommendations, and this kind of works in with the job audit component of the recommendations, is these are either market-driven adjustments or job audit adjustments that occurred based on the market data that's going to be put before you to ensure that you're able to recruit and retain the quality of employee that the city of Gahanna desires based on the market. And you'll see the suggested adjustments right there. So what a job audit is, a job audit is a dorky HR term. And while I'm a lawyer by trade as well, we specialize in HR. So one of the things that employers around the city or around Central Ohio often ask us to do is when a job changes significantly is to value that job from a neutral perspective within an organization. Heidi is the individual who runs our job audit process within our firm. It's one individual who does it because we try to eliminate as much subjectivity as possible. But these, based on looking at how jobs have evolved over time, and it could be any length of time, but a significant amount where the duties actually warrant a change in pay grade, these are the suggested job audit changes that Heidi worked through as part of our process. And then oftentimes when you do make a significant change to your compensation system, the question that comes up is, well, what do we tell staff who are already here? Okay, so if we do shift the pay scale 10% and we hire somebody in new at that minimum, Brian, that you told us to pay somebody, and we have an individual who's been here 7 years and is very close to that minimum, what do we do with that individual? In the public sector, that magic 30 years is, particularly in Ohio, with it being a retirement landmark, it's easy to gauge where somebody should be within their pay grade based on their tenure of service. It's probably the most objective way to do it, particularly for programs that don't have some sort of merit emphasis on it. So what we often do is we utilize a formula to progress current employees through the pay grade so that you don't have what we call horizontal compression, where everybody's lumped regardless of how long they've been here at some same point within the pay grade. That causes morale issues, that causes turnover, and that's something that has an ancillary cost. There's studies out there that show that when you lose a high performer, you as the employer are actually costing yourself up to 200% within cost, productivity, interviewing, training. That number's out there, and it's a scary number considering the turnover that employers are looking at right now. So I'm going to turn it over to Heidi right now to talk about the costing component. Like I said, she's the brains behind the operation.
Okay, so is this on? Didn't sound like
It's on.
it's on. Okay, just wanted to make sure. So the cost for all of this, everything that Brian talked about, the total is $196,353. Now, broken out, the cost to just bringing any employee that is below the minimum is $61,572. And then if you throw in that progression piece that Brian just mentioned, that is the additional $134,781. Now, one of the things that often comes up and, that we often do is we do a phased-in approach, which is what you see here. So we have a phased-in approach over 2 years. So that essentially means you're just breaking up that cost and spreading it out over 2 years. Now, the reason you'll see year one is approximately $142,000, year two is approximately $54,000. We took basically any employee who was set to get an increase of $1 or less and went ahead and gave that full increase in the first year. And then in the second year, it's just picking up anybody that was set to get more than $1. So, oh, yeah, you did. So the next piece of this, and just to kind of talk about how we got to all of this, is the market study. This is the wage survey that we conducted. We did do this survey, and we looked at 13 different cities across Central Ohio. I do believe that these are the same list of cities that we used back in 2016 when we did this study, so nothing new there. And then in the survey, we basically just have each city provide wage ranges for their comparable position or similar position, as well as the current wage rates that those employees are making right now in that job. So looking at this, it's going to be hard to see up there, but basically this is the survey results, and how this is broken out is you have the list of positions that we surveyed, and we do what's called benchmarking, and that's where we essentially identify specific jobs within the city, where if we go out and survey those jobs, we'll be able to find comparable information. So we have a list of the positions. We have Gahanna's wages there as you move over to the right. We have the average of the responses that came back. And then I think the most important piece on this sheet is the variance to the market. So that is, how does Gahanna compare to what the market says? And so that is what's in that light orange, yellow, whatever that is on the screen. So you can see it's, the positions vary, and it always will. It's never going to be perfect one way or the other. But really, if you scroll down, the city's a little bit on the low side, which is, but it's not scary low. But that's where that 10% is coming from. That 10% will pull the wages back up to around where the market says that they should be. So even further to the right is basically then comparing what our survey results say and comparing that with the 10% shift that we've recommended. And that's what you see there on the far right. So there's several pages of the survey results. And then the last thing, so this is, Brian had talked about the job audits, and we just briefly wanted to cover kind of what that process entailed. So one of the first things that we do when we do a job audit is we review the current job description. That's typically step one. And then we also have each employee and their supervisor complete what's called a position analysis questionnaire. So this is where they go through, the employee completes, it's a lengthy questionnaire, but it walks us through their job and what they do, what the minimum qualifications are for the job, so the education and experience requirements, physical hazards or physical demands, the hazards, and then most importantly, the essential functions of the job. And then the supervisor goes through that questionnaire, reviews it, just ensuring accuracy, provides additional notes. And then also for you all, what we did is I actually met individually with each employee and their supervisor to kind of take it even a step further, so that way I could truly understand what the job was, what it entailed, and then that way I can make an accurate recommendation on classification and pay grade.
And just to kind of go back to a comment that was made in the committee as a whole, compensation it's a sausage-making process too. There are the objective processes and HR processes in place to measure internal equity, to measure the market, but at the end of the day, a lot of it comes down to pay philosophy as well, which is where the city of Gahanna wants to be within that market, what they are comfortable with paying their staff, what sort of budget parameters you have in place. Our recommendations are based on essentially putting you in a position where we think you can recruit and retain against comparable employers within Central Ohio. Of those 13 jurisdictions, I think Heidi's done the same study for 5 or 6 of them, and I will tell you that right now it is kind of an arms race, and unfortunately that's the environment you're in. And I think if you look at some of your turnover statistics, it would probably reflect the same. But at the end of the day, you guys set compensation. You have to be comfortable with where you are as an organization and what you want to pay your staff. Do you guys have any questions on process or how we came to any of the things that are in our report tonight?
Thank you, guys. Appreciate the presentation. Anything further from the administration? I guess I'll give Director Vollmer one more opportunity to weigh in. Okay. Anything from council on this particular topic? Mr. Larrick and then Mr. Renner.
All of the analysis that I think everything that you presented is with regard to dollars comparison, all of that piece. So very thorough. Any views of any other contributing factors beyond that with regard to turnover, hiring rates, time to hire, any of those statistics separate from just simply A pays this, B pays that?
So when we look at, and that's a good point, A pays this and B pays that. The one lucky thing that we do have when we're doing this analysis is it's pretty apples to apples, at least in the public sector, because for the most part, the bennies across those organizations are pretty comparable. Now, with respect to turnover, I think the figure that was kind of thrown our way was, and I don't think it's a exact number, but if you look at your staff in 10 years of service was about 30% in 2019 from a turnover standpoint. And if you look at your staff tenure and you break down your roster, it's young, and there's a reason why it's young. And that's not the case in every public employer, particularly with some of the retirement changes. Recently, we're seeing more and more people work longer and working for the same employer longer because PRS changed the rules that you had to play by. With respect to your hiring process, onboarding process, that was not part of this study.
Okay, so the study was all dollars,
Correct.
AB. So there is no analysis with regard
Correct.
to tenure, turnover, et cetera.
Correct.
Mr. Renner?
Thank you. Couple of questions. It wasn't clear to me, but which is the market rate? Is it the minimum, or are we talking about the midpoint?
Sure.
I've always been confused by that.
Yeah, and that's a great question, and I think the easiest way to understand that is every employer measures it different. So when we try to capture it, we try to capture the bottom, which is usually entry-level rate, and also the top. Now, how we build those ranges, so to speak, from the minimum to maximum, in the public sector, you're usually looking at, what, Heidi, 35 to 50%, somewhere in there. There's no exact number. I will tell you that it goes back also to compensation philosophy. There's one, and they're the easiest to use because it's in their ordinance. There's a city in that list, and I won't name exactly who it is, but their compensation philosophy is they take that data that we came up with, and they essentially say we want to be in the top 3, and we want to be at least 3% above the mean or the average, and that's where we want to be. So a lot of it does come down to where the city is comfortable paying individuals. But the data itself, and Heidi, since you crunched the numbers, am I saying I'm the way we analyze it from the minimum, and we don't take a hard look at the midpoint, correct?
Correct.
And the other reason for that, and I would say midpoint is probably closer to market, but let's say we built a scale off of 45%. You're going to see 22.5 above, 22.5 down, and we're going to try to gauge midpoint about market. I will tell you that most jobs, you ought to probably be around there within 5 or 6 years because you ought to be competent at your position within that point in time. How you get there, that depends on your pay processes and what you got in place there.
Okay, thank you. A couple other questions is about the job audit, and I think you were going through this very well. I just want to make sure I heard it correctly. You were definitely talking about the internal and the external equity, and I appreciate that. So, but does that mean that when you did the job audits and internally, but did you also look across other municipalities for comparable responsibilities and what have you? Is that what also was part of it?
So it just depends on whether or not those positions kind of got targeted as a benchmark position. But many of the positions that we did a job audit for, where we reviewed the job functions, were included in the market study.
And so when we send out the the request for information to all the comparable employers too. It's just not job title. It's responsibilities, it's minimum qualifications. Luckily, Heidi's built a rapport with a lot of the jurisdictions that were mentioned, and the data's a lot easier to come by than particularly if not, especially during a pandemic. Why we benchmark too is because, first of all, if you target every job and you try to get data on every job and you try to match it up to the market, that's just not going to happen. So we try to take jobs from the top, we try to take jobs from the bottom, we try to take jobs from the middle, and we get a lot better response rate because if you request 70 jobs from a locale when they have other stuff to do, a lot of times, even though it is a public record, that information is just not as easily attainable. And it is a sausage-making process. It's meshing the external with the internal as well as the compensation philosophy to come about to our recommendations.
Well, the average American worker is actually being asked to do more today than before.
No doubt.
So I totally understand that.
Yeah, and without getting into the statewide movement, but I think you're exactly right. Staffing has right-sized, or for lack of a better term, or gone backwards, and funding has not necessarily been there to do everything that you guys are tasked with doing too. So it's a delicate line between staffing and pay.
Right. And just one more. I was curious, when you were showing the data about the wage comparisons across the board and everything, did you at all or ever look at what MORPC provides? Personally, I've had a problem. I work for the county, had a large department. I've always had trouble with the data from MORPC because it feels like it's non-standardized. You know, you have a bunch of different responsibilities and a bunch of different pay scales, so I couldn't really understand. But I was curious what it did to match up to what you saw.
So we absolutely use MORPC as a resource, but Heidi does her own homework on all that stuff. And in fact, she developed MORPC's pay scale too. So we like to do our own homework, but we definitely use it as a resource.
Thank you, that's it.
All right, and anything further from council on this particular topic? Okay, thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
So I'll just move back to the beginning here under the general government section. Received a question on regards to some content on page 31, whether or not the administration was prepared to have or present any plans or processes, if they exist, surrounding the ARP funds and plans to allocate $50,000 in grants to nonprofits.
Yeah, so it would follow a similar process to the CARES program that we ran for small businesses. There'll be a preset determined amount. We haven't gotten to that yet, but there'll be applications that'll be required. They'll have to state how they're going to use those grant dollars, assisting those the most impacted by the pandemic. On the backside of that, we're required by federal regulations to do subrecipient monitoring. So with substantiation, they'll have to report back how they use those funds and how it met the Treasury guidelines. It would sunset, so along with all the other dollars, all the awards would have to be made and the program closed by the end of 2024.
Okay. Thank you, Joanne. Anything from council on that? So, Joanne, just a quick follow-up. Does the federal government provide some sort of outlines as far as what types of nonprofits or industries/sectors would be eligible?
It basically says that they have to be of an organization that is providing assistance to those that were most impacted.
Okay.
So kind of thinking along the lines of those that are helping those who are maybe still struggling with job loss, maybe still struggling with homelessness. So focusing on that group of individuals that are still feeling some deep impacts.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you. Anything further on that? Nope. Okay. Next question under general government. Again, I'll just read it into the record. Please explain the anticipated changes in general fund revenue shown in the fines and fees category from 2020 actual to 2021 budget to 2022 budget. It's going to be found on page 40, and how these numbers differ from those provided on page 27 in the budget book.
So page 27 is the all fund summary, so that's across every fund of the city. And then page 40 is just looking at the general fund itself. The biggest change there that you'll see is kind of the dip in 2021, and that was the reclassification of the public service general administration services to the special fund, and then planning to bring that back into the general fund in 2022.
Thank you, Joanne. Anything from council? Nope. All right, moving along. Next question, please provide any high-level insight as to whether the increase in revenue is believed to be a trend or related to the pandemic, and what are the administration's thoughts as to what is going on in Gahanna as compared to any other regional, state, or national trends that you might be observing? I believe the content for this, or the context for this question could be found on page 51 in the budget book.
Yep. So what I tried to convey on page 51 is that we really don't know what post-pandemic trends are going to be. I think as we move into 2023, we're probably going to see some of those play out, you know, as businesses continue with the work from home or figuring out if that works or not, how net profit is going to be impacted, and then looking at some of those national indicators. Specifically looking at what is on there for revenue and kind of given some history. So in 2020 with the pandemic, we lost about 3.9 million. That was very close to what we had predicted with those models that we ran. We had predicted that we would lose about 3.6 million. Moving into 2021, there were still so many uncertainties with vaccinations, when the state would open, when local municipalities would reopen, so we predicted a continued loss. As I got into the third quarter of 2021 and kind of looking at that and projecting it forward to the end of the year, we're actually going to have a gain, not a loss. I have that kind of chalked up to a couple things. You know, the vaccinations. I think everything, because of the success of the vaccinations, we're able to open much quicker than anticipated. We still had continued growth. There were a lot of the sectors of the industry that weren't impacted as much as some of the other ones. So obviously hospitality felt a deep cut. But then when you look at the PPE providers, those providing the personal protection equipment, technology was able to continue to succeed. And then you had some businesses that were completely able to change their line of products. So even though some industries were kind of on the downswing, there were some industries that were able to continue and kind of grow during this. We also had the development and planning departments that, despite the pandemic, were able to keep some projects moving forward. So I've asked Nate to kind of speak to the local economy and kind of what we're seeing there.
Kevin, if you may pull the slides I sent earlier. Ooh, that's terrible.
It's not used to being
I
here
love
that late.
technology.
It's my favorite thing.
We were at a rave.
Maybe? There we go. And candidly, you know, I've only been here 6 months and 2 weeks, but who's counting at this point? So Mr. Michael Blackford is...
Hours on that, too?
Huh?
Do you have hours?
I
Minutes?
can if you'd like me to calculate them at this point. But I've also asked Mr. Blackford to join on this conversation, as his office has really led much of this initiative. So you see where we are in the project pipeline as approved for this year, and these are numbers derived from the Planning Commission. And I think what you're seeing here in the Gahanna is a microcosm of what's happening in a lot of different communities. And 2020 was was a year of so much uncertainty that there was so much pent-up development left on the sidelines. Companies did not want to pull triggers on projects. They weren't sure what they were going to look like or how they were going to operate. And so you've seen this huge release of project this year with over $170 million at this point of capital investments committed to the city of Gahanna. And the job numbers are just outstanding. Our industry sectors, Michael did correct me earlier, I had a different level in this. So these are his zoning classifications, I believe. I think I used housing versus residential improperly on this one, but I fixed it on the second one. So I'm very inconsistent in how I'm looking at this. Huh? But these are projects that are still pending in the queue. And this is a snapshot as of the end of October. So we're still seeing some momentum going into next year and in the later part of this year, specifically in the commercial and the industrial sectors. We've talked about it at length here in this council and these chambers around Project Gall, but we've seen some smaller projects, even this evening, Ohio Exteriors moving forward with some smaller projects in that sub-$1 million range, but you're seeing them continuing to happen in the marketplace. My biggest concern in all of this, and the reason I wanted to do these slides, was in the office sector. There is so much uncertainty still in office sector, work from home implications, and what's happening. We've engaged a lot of our office-based businesses here in Gahanna. They're still looking at a hybrid model where they're 2 or 3 days into the office place, 2 or 3 days from home. And at this point, there are no plans on bringing full office members back. As the gentleman who was here earlier spoke about competitiveness in the workplace, those workers who want to work from home or want to have that flexibility, if their employer has said we're coming back full employment, they have basically said, great, we'll go find something else that allows us that flexibility that we're looking for. And they'll probably have it within a week to 10 days, given the competitive nature of the market. One thing that I really wanted to highlight here is the lifespan of these projects and what's been happening in our marketplace. The jobs created, jobs retained, and the capital investments over the last 5 years, since 2017 through now. This year, even if you take this year as an anomaly against 2020 values, in 2019, which is our last year of what I'm going to call traditional growth in this city, we're still up well over 112 and 138% respectfully over 2019 values in capital investment and job creation here in the marketplace. And I always like showing a good graph. So I want to make sure you saw this graphic representation as well, though that blue is terrible on that screen. You kind of lose it for the 2019 number. But here are our job numbers. In short, our economy is robust, but I think one of our best assets in the city is our diversity in our workforce and our job placements. But I still would caution a high level of concern around our office space as that situation continues to evolve. Office Center in particular in the city's area along Tech Center Drive and that space continues to evolve rapidly. What's really kind of kept us steady has been our modern medical campus areas and that evolution of what people are looking for from an amenity standpoint in medicine. And that's been our real strong niche for us and will continue to be so moving forward. So there's a true balancing act there. But I welcome to answer any questions you might have on the economy.
I have
Ms. Angela.
a question, the scary word inflation.
Yes.
So give us a thought on that if you would like to.
My biggest concern in inflation is just that. There's so much uncertainty in that marketplace right now. Supply chain is driving a lot of those cost bears. When you're looking at what's happening in our port systems right now, and you can look at any article today, the ports that have seen the greatest level of increase of production are the same ports that are struggling with workforce. The era of putting up these facilities in rural areas is gone. And so the ports that are actually in more urbanized areas that have higher demand or higher access to workability will thrive in these spaces and hopefully bring down inflation numbers. But it's really going to be driven by supply chain in the next 6 to 9 months. And if we're able to get stuff off the shores and inland. The communities that are going to be well positioned for this are places like Columbus, actually, where we have a direct double stack train from Norfolk. So trains and freight that are coming into the Norfolk port come right into the Heartland line here in Columbus at Rickenbacker and then be offloaded. You're going to see a lot more of that happening, but not to the degree necessary to stymie inflation to a degree. It's just going to take time.
Thank you.
Ms. Bowers?
Yes, thank you. If we don't have an answer to this question, I'm wondering how we can get it. Sure. What % of Gahanna residents work in Gahanna?
I do not have that number on me, but I do have that number.
Okay.
Actually, I have the MSI data on that. I can supply that out to you at a later time.
All right, perfect, thank you.
I'll send it to Crystal, and she can send it to the rest of the council.
Thank you, Nate.
Mr. Laird?
I might have that.
The capital investment, roughly what portion of that in dollars is abated?
Great question. I do not have that number. I can certainly get that for you.
Thank you. Is abated?
Okay.
Great, thank you. Anything further from council on this topic? Okay, thank you all.
Thank you.
Okay, sticking with, looks like page 51 and then on to 52 in the budget book, please provide clarification and specifics regarding the reclassification and movement of funding of various activities back into the general fund from special revenue funds. So Joanne, I'm assuming that one's you.
Yeah, so in 2020, there were a couple things that happened. One was it was our first year of the 1% income tax increase, and if you remember, we were budgeting that at a reduced level on previous knowledge and research that we did that said there would kind of be a ramp up. So when we projected our income tax revenue for those special funds, we were predicting a reduced amount to be received. We also had to cancel a lot of programs and events, so we didn't spend as much as we were planning to. What we found out on the income tax side was that we were pretty much at compliance at that point. So we didn't spend as much as we were planning to because of the pandemic, and we received more than we were planning to on the income tax. So what that resulted in was a kind of an addition to restricted, unreserved fund balances in those special funds. And then when we were going into 2021, we knew that we were going to have a scaled back programming for some of those activities too. So still not recognizing a full-blown season or full-blown programs and events going into 2021. So we were still looking at a pretty large restricted unreserved fund balance. As is policy and best practice, you kind of want to look at those restricted fund balances first. If there's strings attached to it, you want to kind of use those resources before you use your general unrestricted balances. So we identified a couple activities that we could push into those special funds, kind of utilize that restricted fund balance. Well, then as we're moving into 2022 and we're going to have full programming, in 2021, we changed our income tax projection to recognize 100% compliance. So we recognize the full revenue. And then in 2022, same thing, but with a full season, those didn't have the capacity to continue with those activities. So we pushed them back over to the general fund.
Perfect, thank you. Anything from council on that particular topic? Okay, thank you. All right, now moving on to the next section, I believe most of these topics most of these questions deal with the topic of the mayor's office. So the first one, referencing the line item requests from the mayor's office that were shared during the last committee meeting, and this is specifically the exhibits, I think, that were shared. Please be prepared to discuss whether it would make more sense to move the budget requests for the various projects, such as wayfinding, economic development, collateral, and so forth, to the departments that the projects will develop through. Again, I think for more context, page 64 can serve as a reference in the budget book. So, Madam Mayor, is that you?
That would be me.
All
Yes,
right,
thank you.
Floor is yours.
So it might be helpful just to explain kind of what the general budgeting practice has been within a city in recent years. So in recent years, the general practice has been to centralize projects or expenses that impact multiple departments under one department. That allows for better tracking of costs, operational efficiencies, and also provides for better overall project management. Several examples of that are our mobile phones, which historically were handled, each department was responsible for their own mobile phones for their staff. Those are now all compiled under IT, which allows us to bulk price. It allows better management of the service that we're getting and the contract management of that. Professional development is another example of that. That used to always exist within separate departments. Each department had their own professional budget line item. That all now lives in human resources. So they can coordinate training opportunities and monitor and track certifications and licensing and extra professional development that our staff members need and want. Office supplies, certainly we all have office supplies within our departments. Those all live within public services because they take care of our facilities and manage our facilities. So the projects that are in the mayor's office are really no different than that. They are projects that ultimately require my input and approval, but mostly they are citywide impactful projects. So at the end of the day, just to be consistent with our budgeting, it makes sense that they live within my budget line item. And actually, where I was going to go with, at the end of the day, they all live within a general fund. So whether they are in development or whether they are in HR, at the end, they're still going to come from the general fund. But it makes sense to have those specific projects that ultimately require my approval or that are citywide initiatives to live in my office.
Thank you. Anything further from council on that particular topic?
I'm not sure what to do with that. As an example, wayfinding doesn't make sense to me to sit in the mayor's office.
So wayfinding is ultimately going to depend on communications and marketing and branding. That wayfinding is going to affect everything from public service and parks and recreation. It's just living there it's not the actual construction of it, it's just the design work and the concept work that's budgeted right now, which is going to be really a marketing issue for us. How do we make that consistent with our brand and our logo?
I understand, but I disagree. Wayfinding is part of the functions of the city, the administrative work of a particular area, not the mayoral office.
Well, when it comes time to actual construction, there'll be capital projects, but the design of that, it needs to be consistent with the brand and the look that we want to have within the city. And that needs to flow ultimately through the communications and marketing department, in conjunction working with input from all of the other departments, public service, parks and recreation as well. But at the end of the day, they have to coordinate that and ensure consistent look and feel and messaging for the city. At this initial stage, once we get to construction, that's a different story.
I don't know where to go with it.
So, Ms. Bowers?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I think probably one of the council members that asked this question, and I really appreciate the context that you gave for it. I think, I just wanted to thank you for that, so.
Oh, thank you, appreciate that.
Anything further on that topic? Okay, moving on. Madam Mayor, you get another one here.
Yep.
Please be prepared to define and distinguish between the various marketing and communications roles requested in the mayor's office. And for reference, these can be found or discussed in the budget book on pages 62 and 63.
Okay. It's interesting, the answer to this one is not unlike the answer to the previous one. And I think to provide context for this answer, it really would be helpful to provide a refresh as to how communications and marketing have evolved within the city over the past essentially 2 years at this point. Under prior administrations, communications within the city were handled in multiple departments. Public service, for example, took care of all their water bill inserts, drafting letters to residents when there were issues. Parks and Recreation had their own person, took care of their own marketing. PD has traditionally taken care of their own social media and their materials as well. The role of the PIO that we had at the city at the time is not what it would be today. That PIO role that we previously had was support for the mayor, dealing with crisis communication, and that was pretty much it. But all of the communications in the city were handled in multiple departments. And as a result of that, the message of the city was not consistent. The look of the messaging was not consistent. We had some people using Arches, some people using Recurrence Connect. It's been all over the place. We've also had a lack of resident engagement. Historically, the city has not engaged with residents on social media. That has been publicly stated at times. And there was a real need and a thirst within the community to have more resident engagement from the city, from the council office, from the administration. And I've heard it said by actually several council members now that we have been really bad at telling our story to our residents, to our businesses, and to potential businesses wanting to come here. So in order to address that issue, and I wanted to really build out an effective communications and marketing team when I took office last year, to bring all of those communications under one umbrella and basically in-house into one division, to streamline the communications, to make them consistent so they sounded the same as the overall city, they look the same, and to truly begin to tell our story in a consistent way. So again, with that, brought all of the communications and marketing under one umbrella. Kevin, do you have the PDF I prepared? They are now responsible for overseeing and coordinating all of the communications and marketing for every department in the city. Much like HR and IT and finance support every other department, so does communications and marketing. There we go. This is, and I can send this to council as well. This is a list that communications manager Karen Wester and I sat down today and just went through with all of the things that they're responsible for handling. Written publications, certainly the quarterly new citywide magazine, Uniquely Gahanna, that was new in 2021. Coordinating advertising, which is everything from buying the advertising to working with the vendor to doing the design and artwork and creation and making sure it gets submitted. Creation and distribution of printed and mailed newsletters, the senior newsletters. There are 6 issues that go out every year. The design and development and program guide for parks and recreation. That goes out 2 to 3 times a year. Kevin, I'm going to scroll down. I'm not going to read all of this. There's digital publications. There's newsletters that a senior newsletter goes out every week. There's a city newsletter, Parks and Recreation newsletter, and a police monthly bulletin that go out every month. Video and photography production. What we saw during COVID is residents want to receive their information in a much different format. They want to see it quickly. They want to see it in a way that they can understand it. Video communication is really on the uprise. in terms of being used in municipalities everywhere. There are municipalities who are adding digital people to their staffs as we speak. That is becoming a critical piece of communication. Social media. We have 12 social media platforms, all of which require the creation of posts, which can be anything from graphic design to the content, to videos to help communicate messaging. They provide monthly and review monthly analytics on that. Then, of course, we have our wonderful Gahanna.gov website, which requires constant updates for every department in this city, including council. That's a big part of council's communication. We heard that tonight with the request for publication of information on the dump and the changes there and where people can go. There's always, every day is almost an addition of what needs to be sent out to our residents to communicate information. Media outreaches, the creation and distribution of press releases when there's information in the city. Reaching out to media to send them stories to pitch for This Week News, which may or may not get accepted, but we're always telling them stories about what's happening here. Responding to news desk inquiries, managing requests for interviews and comments, whether those are online or written or on-camera interviews. Brand implementation and management, I mentioned earlier. You could go see it in our fleet vehicles right now. You'll have a vehicle with the arch, you'll have a vehicle with where currents connect, and then you'll have a vehicle with just the logo in a different color. We're trying to get our hands all around that, but there are hundreds and I'd say thousands of forms that are used in this city every day that need to look the same. That's all brand management. Everything from our forms to our community, our correspondence to our signage is all brand management. Resident and community engagement, responding to emails, social media inquiries, in-person events, making sure the city has a presence there, such as at Holiday Lights this weekend, promoting that, recording and promoting the in-person events to share information and promote those so that residents know that they're available, interfacing with community organizations, stakeholder communications, resident communications. I mentioned the water bills, I mentioned the newsletters, all of those things that need to happen. And the list goes on, and the following is all the different ways they support the individual departments. So in 2020, the demands for communications were somewhat limited because we were focused on COVID. 2021, as I'm calling a transitional year with regard to communications. Parks and Recreation began to resume programming. It is not yet fully back to pre-pandemic levels, but we sure did get a taste of it this year with what that requires and the effort it takes on staff to market and promote their recreational programming, pools, camps, in-person events that are promoted by the city, that are put on by the city, but also put on within the community. And we now have an aggressive development team that needs and wants to market the city outside of this city, to draw jobs here, to draw people here to our community. And we have had a significant increase in capital projects. The sidewalk program alone is going to require extensive communication with our residents. And you can't really write a paragraph or two explaining them how to grind down a sidewalk. You have to show them in a video. You have to show them what's going to happen and what they can expect so that they're not taken by surprise. And residents, again, now expect to receive that information in a much easier to consume manner. So with that, the need for some additional help has really become evident within our team. We have had two full-time people and one almost full-time person working 35 hours a week. The ask is to move that part-time, she is technically part-time, but again, at 35 hours a week, I'd submit that's just about full-time. Moving her from 35 hours to 40 hours a week. From a payroll standpoint, that's an addition of $5,400 for the year, that would make a difference for her. She would be responsible for, in large part, for that video and digital communication. The marketing manager that we currently have would be responsible for overseeing all of the marketing needs for the city, that brand implementation and management, advertising, event and programming promotion, signage, posters, flyers, all need to be created. Working with the development department on a marketing strategy, overseeing the Parks and Recreation marketing when they get back up to full speed in 2022 with, again, camps, pools, camps and pools, senior center, that's the one I'm forgetting, and all of their events that they're doing. Last year I asked, and council approved, for a part-time community liaison. because I believe that there was a need for that. I did not fill that in 2021 because I felt as though we had higher priorities to fill, and I put my need on the back burner for that. But there is a great need within the community to have an interface between City Hall and the community, having somebody to interface with the community stakeholders, the many organizations that are involved. I know we've got Gahanna Arts Council in the back and Make Gahanna Yours representatives here. There's a lot of communication that needs to happen, and there needs to be a sole point of contact rather than going through multiple people in the city, which sometimes elicits inconsistent answers. You need one point of contact. So what I have proposed, and it's again on page 34, is to transition the communications manager to the title of community relations manager. Basically the same job, duties expanded somewhat. Who would be responsible for ensuring that overall unity in messaging for the city, setting that overall vision and message for what we want to communicate, function as the liaison within the community for those stakeholder organizations and individuals, and to build relationships and help to streamline all of those necessary and critical communications that need to happen. But a large part of the things that I just shared with you on that PDF, all of the community-facing communications that need to happen. All of the departmental support for resident communications, all of the, I can't go through the list, but it's all up there. But basically what the communications manager does right now, with the exception of rolling off some things such as the creation of press releases, social media, and really just providing an extra added support person for the plethora of communications that we need to happen. We can't keep up with what needs to be communicated to the public right now. We just can't. We've got, again, we heard, I think, a couple of examples today of things that need to be pushed out to the community and asks for that. We need an extra pair of hands as we are gearing up with significant capital projects, with increased programming, and the request for staffing right now is in line with what other municipalities of our size already have. Westerville, for example, already has on staff 3 full-time people for communications and marketing, plus 2 full-time people in their Parks and Recreation Department, and I believe that they have an ask in their 2022 budget for an additional full-time PR person. So with the ask that I have in this year's budget, it would be the existing 2 full-time personnel, changing the 35 hours a week digital coordinator to 40 hours a week. I think that's an added cost of about $5,400 for the year, and then adding 1 full-time position. And again, I remind council, last year you approved a part-time community liaison. Won't fill that position, instead ask for a full-time additional communications persons to assist in the marketing efforts that we have here in the city. At the end of the day, we need to be able to communicate with our residents and our businesses. We need to be able to attract new businesses here that bring jobs here. And part of our communications is to tell our residents what we're doing with their dollars and what we're doing for them, and to make sure that those lines of communication are open. So hopefully that explains the ask.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Anything from council on that particular topic? Nothing further?
Oh,
All right.
ask about the PIO.
Sure.
Could you just distinguish between the public information officer and the community? So what I see on page 64 is that the communications manager is that the one that would be changed to a community relations manager?
Just the title would change,
And then
with the added role of functioning as the community liaison, yes.
okay, and the PIO, could you explain the difference between the PIO and the community relations manager?
Yes, so the PIO would function, and it even could be a misnamed title. We could change the title, but after talking through our communications and marketing staff, it would be somebody to add additional communication support. One of the things that we really don't have time to do is to tell our story in terms of issuing press releases and dealing with the media that way and getting news stories out that way. The current communications manager would continue to handle all of the crisis communications and media inquiries that receive that way. But part of the PIO's job would be to help push information out to the media that way, and then provide additional support for all of the other functions we already saw.
Anything further? No? Okay, thank you. Moving on to public safety. Again, context for this question can be found, I believe, on pages 35 and 99. Received a question about what is the source of funding for the requested dispatch operations manager.
That's coming from the general fund. Was that the,
Simple enough. Anything further from council? No? Okay.
What question was that?
That is the first one under public safety. You good? Okay. Second question under public safety. Is the operations center referenced on page 35 the same as the communications center discussed on page 93? And what are the shared costs of the center with Mifflin Township or any other entity? And can those be highlighted or shared with council this evening?
they are the same, and I'm going to turn it over to the chief to discuss where we are with any agreements related with Mifflin Township and what associated costs are with the communications center.
Thank you. As Joanne mentioned, those are the same in terms of definitions. This really goes back into about 2017 when we first started working on the Communications Center project with Mifflin Township. They've since designated that building the Operations Center, a very brief title. So that's why I think it's a little bit of confusion. We refer to it both ways in our narrative. With that, we have exchanged working documents on establishing an agreement on the overall operations of the center with Mifflin Township, and also some of the costs, the cost share. Our cost share is going to be primarily related to utilities, housekeeping, and maintenance items. We will maintain our individual contracts and licensing and the various components of the center's operations independently. What we do share and what we have shared since 2009 is the operation of our 911 system. There's that is transitioning, and Kevin here is an integral part of that piece, as is Craig Main over at Mifflin Township. But that is transitioning to a SaaS model, a software as a service model, with the upgrades that we're currently doing to the system. We have shared in those operational costs with the operation of 911 with Mifflin Township and the ARCOG for several years. That arrangement will continue. There will be some additional costs because we have some network and fiber-related expenditures that will be included in those costs. So that will be another cost share. And again, we're working through in that exchange of agreements, and we'll bring that back once everything's complete.
Thank you, Chief. Council? Nothing? Okay. Thank you. And then I believe one more for public safety.
Sorry.
Sorry, Mr. Renner. Yep, you have the floor, buddy.
This is cold, I can't talk that loud, sorry. I do have one question. Chief, is I was trying to look through the budget, the Operations Center. Is it parsed out anywhere in the budget detail about just the center itself? And I know you talked about some shared costs, but are those like coming later at a different point of it, so we'll know exactly what percent or what dollars and that kind of stuff are coming from the township versus what the city is paying?
Yes, again, as I mentioned, we're exchanging documents right now, or exchanging a document on the total cost share. It is going to be, and I will say rather minimal in terms of what our expenses are going to be related to maintenance, housekeeping, and utilities, because it's based on our overall square footage of occupancy of that facility. Again, the city provides TIF dollars specifically dedicated to that center, and that's really where the no cost of the entire project lies. We did present in the previous budget going into last year and then in this year in terms of our dollars invested in terms of equipment that went into the center. For example, the new radio consoles, some of the expanded technology. So that was detailed in last year's budget. But we will be finalizing that agreement, and everything that we will have in terms of the utilities and housekeeping, it will be in our contract services line item.
It sits in the public safety line item in their contract services. So you'd be looking under general administration, those contract services lines, there's estimates included in there.
Got it, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And what about, I'm sorry, what about the TIF dollars then? Is that itemized somewhere?
Yes, so that is part of the Johnstown Road TIF. So if you look at the contract services for the Johnstown Road TIF, that revenue share is in that contract services.
Got it, thank you very much.
All good, sir?
Yes, sir,
Okay.
thank you.
Thank you. And then the last one, under public safety, just asking the administration if they could discuss the reference to transfers from the Public Safety Special Revenue Fund that are being allocated to subsidize the police pension fund. This is referenced on page 34. I believe it is the first bullet at the top of the page.
So police pension cost is an operational cost that supports the entire department. In 2021, we determined that there was capacity in the Special Revenue Fund to provide that operational support, so we're continuing that into 2022.
Anything from council? Going once, going twice? Okay. Thank you, Joanne. Okay, moving on to Parks and Recreation. What are the drivers of the increase in contract services from 2021 to 2022? This can be referenced on page 85. And how do these numbers fit within the 15% increase in operating expenses related to contract services found on page 38?
So I'll start off, and then Stephanie can answer any questions that come on the heels of that. So on page 85, 21 to 22 is related to the movement of recreation back into the special revenue fund, back into the general fund from the special revenue fund. And the overall 15% increase is related to a couple things. There's the Parks Master Plan refresh. There's also, again, the full year programming, as we discussed earlier. And then there's some additional communications costs associated in there. So I'll just turn it over now to Stephanie if you have any specific questions on any of those.
Stephanie, do you have anything to add to that, or?
I don't, unless there's questions.
Okay. Anything from council on that particular topic? Okay, thank you. We'll let you off easy. All right, moving on to capital improvements. I believe this topic can be found on page 127 in the budget book regarding play elements. Is there a listing of the various park playground equipment, the ages of the equipment, and what has reached or is close to reaching the end of its useful life?
There is. So this is what's displayed, and I'll describe the document here. So you'll have the park, the year that it was installed. We are basing off of an 18-year cycle, and then you'll see the replacement year based off of that time of when it was initially installed. The surface is also included here, so it's listed as half-life surface. More often than not, we anticipate that the surface is going to need to be replaced before the actual structure needs to be replaced. So that's why that's included in here as well.
I'm a big fan of the exhibits. Anything from council on this topic?
Can you forward this?
Absolutely.
And I would imagine we will include the council members-elect on anything that's forwarded. Is that okay?
Yep. I can just send it to Crystal.
Okay.
Is that fair?
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. So nothing further on that? All right. Thank you, Stephanie. Okay. Page 143 in the budget book references electronic vehicle or electric vehicle charging. I think that's a typo. The charging stations, not charging states. Are usage statistics available for the existing EV charging stations within the city? And if so, can that information be shared? And then have any grant opportunities been identified to cover or partially defray the fixed costs of plant on these installations?
Absolutely. So to the first question, I was able to reach out to Grant Crawford, who's Public Service Department, one who oversees the operations and maintenance of the existing facilities. In our correspondence, Mr. Crawford noted that they're still relatively new, so there's not a real reliable baseline attributed to the utilization as of yet. We can certainly, as we go through the process, provide that updated data if and when we have a better baseline of utilization. To the second point, this is actually a broader initiative. My office was approached by the City of Whitehall. Zach Woodruff, the City Administrator and former Economic Development Director, is working with MORPC on a multi-jurisdictional grant application to support the electrification of stations throughout the Northeast Corridor sectors. So this would include Westerville, ourselves, Whitehall, Bexley, Reynoldsburg. I think those are the key communities. Please don't quote me on that. I don't have the final formal list in front of me. What you're seeing as part of this appropriation would be our 20% match. Each of the stations represents about $15,000 worth of investment, of which the MORPC grant would cover 80%. I believe the city is in line to obtain 20 of these charging stations as part of that comprehensive grant application. So this would be our cost share into that program.
So it's $15K per station, and we're responsible for 20% of that $15K?
Correct,
Or the
yes.
15K? Okay, all right.
All of the ones that we already have, the chargers, are they being used? Are they?
Well, that was what Mr. Crawford had denoted to me, that we don't have a good baseline of that data.
Oh, I'm
as of
sorry,
yet.
okay.
I got a quick question. Mr. Laird?
Can you get hours of usage and/or total kilowatt hours? Those are just a simple number.
Sorry, buddy.
Walked really far just to say yes.
Thank you.
We don't have good data as of yet. There was some major delays with the supply chain, so they haven't been installed very long. Marketing just did a large social media outreach within the past few months, so we hope that'll help kick up the utilization of them as well.
So however long they've been in service, whatever date they were put in service, and then total hour usage total for all of them that have been installed.
Sure.
As of right now?
Yeah, pick a
Or
date.
you mean at some later date?
No, pick a date. End of the month, 1st of November, something, a simple number.
Okay.
Anything further from council? Okay, thank you all.
Thank you.
Next question in line here is, what practical or technical feasibility exists to fund capital projects? One example given was the Price Roadhouse renovations through the Parks Special Revenue Fund and shift the operating cost to the general fund. I believe that particular item can be found on page 117 in the budget book.
Yeah, so it's not, basically because the ballot language for the 25% was for operational cost only.
That comes
So
from
it
council.
wouldn't be lawful to move capital into the operating accounts.
So it's restricted, basically, is what you're saying? Okay, thank you, Joanne. Anything from council on that? Nope, okay, thank you. All right, second to last question. Under the all funds summary section, it states that there is $18.8 million in requested capital outlay, while there was a subtotal figure that I received that said that they had found $13.8 million. So just kind of trying to bridge the gap there and figure out where that disconnect is. I believe the reference pages are 38 and 39.
Yeah, I didn't list the capital improvements for the capital improvement fund. I only discussed the maintenance side. So if you look at pages 116 to 175, and we'll try to do this for next year's budget book, is when I reference to the capital fund section, actually putting the page numbers in there, so there could be a direct
Okay,
linkage to the section where it's more discussed in detail.
perfect, thank you. So do they have like a super stellar budget award that you'll get next year?
That's what I'm work for.
Yeah, thank you. Anything from council on that topic?
I'm just not following the numbers. It's about a $5 million gap.
Yeah, I didn't list so the capital maintenance for the capital improvement fund is in there. But if you refer back to pages 116, specifically that listing, if you look at the capital improvement pieces for the capital improvement fund, those were not specifically listed in that section. Rather, I referenced readers to that capital section to look at that detail. So if you go to pages 116, where it lists everything and you add up all those tables, it comes to the 18.8.
The items on 117 are what's not there. Is that right?
Pardon?
The items on 117 are what's not there? That's about $5 million?
All those tables should add up to the 18.8.
Okay.
Because I was referring to pages 38 and 39. 38 and 39 is where I don't have the capital improvement pieces for the capital improvement fund. So rather it referred to that section, the capital section, and those tables in that section add up to the 18.8 or what the actual request is.
So just for clarification, it looks like page 116 lists capital maintenance, and then page 117 lists capital improvements. I'm assuming there's a bit of a distinction there, maintenance being taking care of existing stuff, improvements obviously either upgrading or new. What you're saying is the top portion of that table found on page 117, which is, I believe, 4.975 million, is just simply not included in that.
Right,
the
it just was a push
paragraphical
to push
information.
readers
Okay.
to that section instead.
Thank you. Anything further? Okay, moving on to the last one. So beyond capital maintenance items such as park and trail asphalt resurfacing, this can be found on pages 116 and 124. Capital improvements such as Big Walnut Trail number 8 and the sidewalk maintenance program, again found on pages 117, 147, and 155. Additional connector trails and/or sidewalks appear to be somewhat limited to small sections like East Johnstown, Claycraft Road, and Library Path. The ask of the administration was please be prepared to share any intentions regarding timing of construction of a larger connector trails plan and whether a more detailed timeline is anticipated to be included in the forthcoming capital improvement plan.
Thank you. So there is a draft community multi-use trail plan, and that draft was actually assessed by, we had a MORPC Easton Fellow intern this past year, and that assessment was to evaluate any type of disparities as well as to do a prioritization of the trails that are part of that draft plan. Along with that process, there's a Bicycle and Trails Committee that is a subcommittee of the Parks and Recreation Board. So that process is continuing on to gain recommendations based off of the historical data that the BTAC has developed over the course of many years. So that draft, along with that background information, will be incorporated into, if approved, the Parks and Recreation Master Plan, which will ultimately be part of the long-term capital maintenance plan.
Thank you. Anything from council on this particular topic?
I'd like to talk about the interns thing and Easton project, because we were involved with that this year. And indeed, it was paid for by the Easton thing. So I hope that we can go ahead and move towards getting more interns like that.
I think we ended up paying 5,000.
We paid a portion of it, yes.
But the
and-
majority, I think, was done by
The majority was paid by the fellowship or the foundation. And he provided, I think, valuable insight, really. I mean, we've always talked kind of about the spine and then the connectors, but he really addressed the issue of the east-west connectivity and our opportunities there, specifically with regard to equitable access to trails and how we grow that. So I know he'll be presenting at the MORPC State of the Region.
Yeah, and indeed, you should be trying to get them in now, the interns, because everybody wants them.
So with that, before closing the committee, I do want to ask my colleagues on council, and I'll solicit input from the administration as well, about sort of next steps here. As I look at the calendar, we are not meeting on the 29th. We have a regular meeting on the 6th, and then we have a scheduled committee meeting on the 13th, and I believe budget is anticipated to be voted upon on the 20th. So that leaves us one regularly scheduled committee meeting to cover this topic any further. I think to this point, we've kind of been in more of a fact-finding mode as opposed to inclusion, exclusion of items in the budget. So I will defer to council any thoughts about how do we shift gears? Do we have enough time to shift gears? What that schedule looks like. I mean, I suppose we could always have a special meeting on the 27th, or are we not scheduled to meet that day since it's the last committee
No, we don't usually.
Yeah, no committee on the 20th?
The
Yeah,
last
okay.
meeting is the last meeting.
Okay.
However, there's always, we could move faster, or we can hesitate and just put in
Mr. Laird?
January instead of.
I think the question kind of gets coalesced into what are the expectations of a majority of council? If the budget is fine, then there's going to be a limited discussion and not much additional needs to be done. If there are concerns with the amount of the budget that is pervasive, I'll use that word because I don't have a better one at the moment, then we need to hit at least at a number or the numbers. And then the question goes to, are we driving where those adjustments come from, or does the administration prefer to make those accommodations?
Here's, I get, the fundamental question that I'm asking is does, do the six of us up here on council feel like we have enough information to make that decision? And then is one meeting sufficient to come to a consensus? I mean, does everybody feel like they've had their questions answered?
Yes.
Okay.
To that question, I definitely feel like we have enough
Okay.
information.
Okay. So stick with the regular schedule. The 13th will be our last committee meeting, and we'll anticipate coming to a consensus on the budget. Mr. Laird?
So to my point of dollars, because it's really what it comes down to, I have a concern with the amount of dollars that are in the budget, and I need to do a little bit of looking, having just come back into town, but my initial expectation is a reduction of capital of a significant amount, as well as a reduction in general operating of a significant amount. So how do we get to that, unless the majority of council is okay with these numbers, and then I'm just one vote?
I could personally probably use a bit more time to figure out if there are specific projects need to be, I guess I'll turn my cards up. I mean, I have a little bit of hesitancy over the Price Roadhouse. I know that we've discussed it several times, it's a bit of a chicken or the egg thing for me, whether it makes more sense to have the Parks Master Plan first and then see where those renovations fit within that. I don't know if I'm alone in that thinking. And it's not that I oppose the project, it's more the timing and the sequence of events of the project. Yep.
Add
Yeah,
something
Director
to
Farrell.
that. So as I, just part of the agenda item this evening, the requirement of the Land and Water Conservation is to hold any type of construction until there's an actual award. We will know in March, typically we'll know in March that there is, of course, an asterisk that based off of the availability of ODNR and the opportunity for their staff to review the applications. The expectation is that we would know in March with not having the funding until October. So with those grants, as well as we did requests for state capital funding as well. So we have 2 grant opportunities for this project. There is a lot of positive momentum around the project and what it will serve for the community and for the region as a whole. So I do think that we have some good applications for grant dollars.
So it's 9:52. If there, again, I'm just looking for input here. I mean, if there's 2 or 3 members of council that think, hey, X dollars needs to be cut out of the budget, feel free to send that to me in an email. I'll put it in a document. I'll ship it off to the administration and see what that looks like. We can discuss that at the next meeting. If there are items that there's objection to, we can throw that on a document. We can discuss that at the next meeting. Again, I'm just fishing for ideas for what's the best process here to get everybody to coalesce around something that we can pass.
I do have a question concerning the 2 people that were here, concerning the how people are paid, et cetera. Has that been completed? Is that put in there, that this 10%? And I think it was,
Yeah, so the next steps for that would be the increases that they shared, the year 1 cost, the $140-something thousand. That is included in the budget already. So the 10% increase in scales you would see when I bring forward the salary ordinance, which would be on the 13th with the benefits ordinance when I bring those. So that's when you would see it incorporated into the ordinances, and that's when you would see all the pay rate changes for those positions that they did job audits on that moved from whatever to whatever.
But you're just planning to go ahead and do that?
That ordinance would come to council for you to vote on. That's an ordinance, the salary ordinance.
Good.
Yeah,
We like to vote on things.
yeah. So that, I bring that every year at the, right before the budget passes, so that way any changes or additions are incorporated into that.
Thank you.
But the dollars are not currently in here.
Yes, they are.
They are in here, okay.
Yeah, so any employee that had a pay rate change based on bringing them to the minimum or bringing them to progression, as they talked about, is already included in the budget in the salaries and benefits, yes.
So how about this? I think, Mr. City Attorney, we are well within our right as a council to discuss process via email, is that correct? So we don't have to hold anybody hostage here this evening. I'll send out an
Process is
email.
okay.
We'll mull it over for a couple of days
As long as
here.
it's not something you're going to vote on, yeah.
Correct, correct.
Exactly.
And we'll hash it out by email what the next step is. Sound good? All right, we're adjourned. Thank you.